Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Bain family. David Cullen Bain was born on March 27, 1972, as the first child of Robin and Margaret Bain, who had married in 1969 when David was 2 years old. Robin decided to become a missionary teacher in Papua New Guinea, so the family moved to Papua New Guinea while living there. The family grew to include 3 more children. David became the oldest sibling, followed by 2 younger sisters, Arawa and Laniet, born 3 years apart, and a younger brother, Stephen, 8 years his junior. During their time in Papua New Guinea, Margaret developed an interest in spiritualism. She began believing in spirits and felt the family needed protection from satanic influences. Over time, Robin's dream of becoming a missionary teacher faded after 14 years. In 1988, the family returned to New Zealand and settled in a large house in Anderson Bay, Dunedin. 3 years later, Robin was appointed headmaster of a small school. However, as promising as this new job sounded, their family still faces many difficulties, and their finances were unstable. By 1994, the relationship between Robin and Margaret had completely broken down. They argued so often that she could no longer bear his presence. She even contemplated the possibility of his death. The family no longer lives normally. The members become cold, and the house is seriously neglected. Over time, the home fell into disrepair, but Robin did nothing to improve it. He was rarely home, spending his weeks living and sleeping in a van near the school on weekends. When he returned, he stayed in another van parked in the yard. The Bain family was deeply dysfunctional. The house was untidy, filthy, and there was no attention to cleanliness. Many people described the house as a pigsty. Robin and Margaret's marriage, like their home, was falling apart. Robin maintained some contact with her children, but the relationship was not particularly close. Later, disturbing allegations would surface, suggesting that Robin had been abusive to his daughter, Laniet. For many years, David has a poor relationship with his father, Robin, but is very attached to his mother, Margaret. In 1994, at the age of 22, he was studying in the music department, aspiring to become an opera singer, although the family faced many difficulties. But all 4 children work or go to school. One of his younger sisters is studying to become a teacher, while his younger brother, Stephen, is still in school. David's education was not easy. He took a few years off from university, but eventually returned to study classical music to make ends meet. He works as a newspaper delivery boy in the morning. There were many problems in the Bain household, and parents should maintain close relationships with each other, as well as with their children. However, in the Bain family, things were different. Each person had their own life and barely communicated with each other. Over time, Margaret became convinced that their troubles stemmed from Robin, whom she believed was possessed by the devil. In her diary, she claimed Robin harbored a demon named Belle. She was so sure of this that she organized an exorcism to exorcise the demon from Robin. Robin's life became miserable. He was forced to live in a camper van and endured Margaret's accusations and rituals whenever he came home. His mental health deteriorated as time went on. He neglected basic hygiene, suffered from severe depression, and seemed to live in a mechanical manner. Colleagues described his behavior as robotic. By June of that year, the family's issues had reached a breaking point, though no one could have predicted the tragic incident that would soon unfold. On the morning of Monday, June 20, 1994, tragedy struck in the Bain household. At 7:09 a.m., David made a frantic call to emergency services and reported that they were all dead, saying he had come home to find his whole family dead. Upon investigation, authorities discovered that Margaret, Arawa, and Laniet were dead in their beds. Stephen was also dead, but his body showed signs of a struggle. Robin was found lying on the living room floor, also dead. David's rifle was found In the same room as Robin's body, a computer was turned on nearby, displaying the message, "Sorry, but David is the only one who deserves to live." When police arrived at the scene, they found a horrific scene, 5 people dead at the outset of the investigation. Police focused on 2 main suspects, Robin and David. Since Robin was deceased, the focus shifted toward unraveling what had truly occurred. The crime scene was staged, make investigators believe that Robin was the killer, as he was found in the living room, holding a rifle nearby. A computer displayed a suicide note believed to be from Robin, implying that he had murdered his entire family. The case, in addition to its tragic nature, is becoming increasingly noteworthy given the length of the rifle and the angle at which the bullet entered Robin's head. It was clear that he could not have harmed himself. In addition, the direction of the blood flow from the wound indicated that his head had been moved immediately after his death. This made investigators suspicious and focused their investigation on another suspect, David. The police began questioning David's actions and statements. If Robin had killed the family, why had David been spared? His account raised further doubts. He said he finished delivering newspapers at 6:40 a.m., and a neighbor confirmed seeing he return home at 6:42 a.m. However, he did not call anyone for help for the next 24 minutes, which raised many questions. When questioned by investigators, David explained that he had fainted from shock and did not know what to do. He also could not provide a reasonable explanation for the fresh wounds on his forehead and knees. In addition, the gun found next to Robin's body belonged to David, making the case even more serious. He admitted he was the only one who knew where the rifle was stored and how to access the safe where it was kept. As suspicions towards David grew, the police arrested him 4 days after the incident, charging him with the murder of his 5 family members. Digital forensics became critical to the investigation, as it was discovered that the computer used to type the note had been turned on at 6:44 a.m. based on witness testimony and David's own account. He returned home at 6:42 a.m., meaning the computer was turned on after his arrival. In the following days, new evidence emerged that proved Robin's innocence. Specifically, there was no blood found on his clothes, including the shoes and socks he was wearing that day. In addition, the rifle did not have his fingerprints. If he harms himself, his fingerprints would have been on the gun. Additionally, no traces of gunpowder were found on him, despite this mounting evidence. Just 17 days after the Bain family murders, relatives decided to burn down the house. They were concerned that teenagers might set fire to the empty house and potentially harm themselves. To prevent this, the relatives took it upon themselves to demolish the house before setting the house on fire. They invited the fire department to supervise. Within minutes, the house was engulfed in bright flames. Visible from a great distance, the smoke lingered in the area for over an hour. A legal expert questioned the legality of the action, doubting whether the legal issues regarding the ownership of the house had been fully resolved. However, David, as the heir and trustee, stated that he never wanted to see the house again. He agreed to demolish it and replace it with something else. As he considered the house to be completely worthless, the investigators could only work with the evidence they already had. Many people believed that the house burned down so quickly that it became strange and suspicious. The question is, why were the relatives allowed to destroy the crime scene? Nearly a year later, in May 1995, David's trial finally began. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline of incident. They argued that, at 5:00 a.m. on June 20, David woke up to the sound of his alarm clock. After getting dressed, he put on a pair of opera gloves, retrieved his rifle, ammunition from the closet, and used a spare key to unlock the trigger lock. He then murdered Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen. During a violent fight with Stephen, David lost a lens from his glasses and suffered multiple injuries, leaving blood at the scene. After the fight, he put his bloody clothes in the washing machine. started it, and took a shower. Then changing into clean clothes, this left bloodstains in both the laundry room and the bathroom. After cleaning up, he followed his usual routine. He delivered newspapers and returned home at 6:42 a.m. He went upstairs, turned on his computer at 6:44 a.m., typed a message, and waited for his father, Robin, to arrive. Robin typically entered the house to pray at 7:00 a.m., and that day was no exception. David hid behind the living room curtain, waited for Robin to kneel in prayer, then attacked Robin at close range. Finally, he staged the scene to make it appear as if Robin had harmed himself. At 7:09 a.m., he called emergency services, pretending to be distraught, however. In court, David presented a completely different version of events. David claimed he woke up at his usual time, prepared the newspapers, and left the house with his dog. He said he returned home at 6:42 a.m., went to his room to take off his shoes, and then went downstairs to wash his hands and put his clothes in the washing machine. According to David, there was no blood anywhere. When he returned to his bedroom, he noticed bullets on the floor and the lock. Panicking, he searched the house and discovered Margaret, Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen murdered in their bedrooms. He found Robin dead in the living room. David claimed he then fainted for 20 minutes before calling emergency services. David's defense team argued that Robin had killed the family, then turned on the computer, left notes on computer, and ended up harming himself, however. This theory had several inconsistencies. David himself admitted he was the only one who knew where the rifle key was kept. Additionally, he could not explain the injuries he had, or explain the 20 minutes he was unconscious. The prosecution, on the other hand, claimed that he had a financial motive for committing the crime. They argued that he wanted to inherit money and knew that his parents had saved a large sum of money to buy a new house. David Bain was ultimately convicted on all 5 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years in the following years. The case continued to attract public attention. News of the Bain family tragedy spread rapidly across the country, sparking intense debate, and opinions are divided as to who is really responsible. One person particularly intrigued by the case was former rugby player and celebrity Joe Karam. After retiring from football, he researched and followed the case closely. He believed in David's innocence, and over the years, he visited David in prison more than 200 times. He even wrote 4 books about the case. His thorough research and persistent advocacy put enormous pressure on the judicial system, leading to a decision to appeal to the Privy Council. This appeal, which began in May 2007, came 12 years after David's initial imprisonment. The review of the case revealed significant issues. As the investigation uncovered a major error involving David, this led to the quashing of the conviction and a retrial. The Privy Council in London expressed doubts about David's conviction, especially since new evidence had emerged after the trial that had not been disclosed. For instance, one witness, Dean O'Toole, a friend of David's younger sister, Laniette, claimed that Laniette had once confided in her about experiencing incest with their father. Robin, Dean stated that after hearing this, she went home that weekend and shared the information with her family. This testimony could have shed light on Robin's motives in the case. However, at the original trial, the judge said Dean's account was just hearsay and judged her to be an unreliable witness. Therefore, this information was not presented to the jury. Additionally, other troubling details about Robin surfaced over time. For example, he shared stories of violence and cruelty written by his students on the school newsletter, including one about a family murder in 1995. The jury was not given access to this information, making it impossible for David's defense to use it effectively against Robin. Eventually, David was released on bail while awaiting the retrial. During this time, he stayed with Joe for a few months, then moving to Auckland for David. This temporary freedom must have felt like a rare luxury, as he still had to appear in court again a year later. In March 2009, the trial resumed. David and all those involved faced the nightmare. Once again, he continued to deny the murders of his 5 family members, and his defense team again insisted that Robin was the one who murdered his family. This time, the defense had more evidence to explain why Robin killed his family. They argued that Robin suffered from severe depression, was frequently anxious when interacting with colleagues and friends, while also facing personal problems. Additionally, Laniette was about to reveal a secret about her incestuous relationship with her father, Robin. This may have affected Robin's mental state. The retrial lasted 3 months, but the jury needed less than a day to reach a unanimous verdict. David was found not guilty on all 5 counts of murder, after spending 13 years in prison and another 2 years being treated as a suspect. David was acquitted and released, however. There are still skeptics who believe he is the killer. On the other hand, there are grounds for suspicion that Robin was the killer. He was very dissatisfied with his life, and if rumors of his unhealthy relationship with his daughter, Laniette, are true, that may have sent him into a state of panic. Several diaries found in Robin's truck, along with disturbing testimony from his co-workers, have painted him as a troubled and unstable individual. This case remains a highly controversial subject, and there are many conflicting opinions. David sought compensation for his wrongful conviction due to the high-profile nature of the case. The New Zealand Justice Minister appointed overseas judges to assess David's claim. The review concluded that he was entitled to compensation for his losses. However, by the time the necessary documents were completed, the Justice Minister had resigned, and his successor disagreed with the terms of the compensation. However, David was eventually compensated for his wrongful imprisonment. In 2016, he received $925 to resolve the matter. During this time, he rebuilt his life. He found a job as an engineer, fell in love, got married, and had a child. He also legally changed his name. There are rumors that the family has since moved to Australia. Meanwhile, a new house has been built on the site where the Bain family home once stood before it burned down. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ingrid Line. Ingrid Line was born on August 2, 1975. She lived in Renton, Washington, just outside Seattle, with her 3 young daughters. Ingrid was a nurse at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. She balanced her career with taking care of her young children. After divorcing Philip Line, who was also the father of her children, they agreed to share parenting responsibilities. Although divorced, Ingrid and Philip still maintained a friendly relationship to effectively raise their daughter together. Ingrid's world revolved around her daughters, Noelle, 10, Brooke, 8, and Reese, 6. She was devoted to their safety and happiness, willing to sacrifice whatever was necessary. On April 9, 2016, Philip Line visited Ingrid at their residence in Renton, Washington, in a visit intended to care for their children together. Philip was sure that Ingrid would be home to welcome him. But when he arrived at the house, Philip was unable to reach Ingrid by phone, so he then contacted Ingrid's mother, Jorga, for support. Jorga and Philip entered Ingrid's house using Jorga's key and began searching for Ingrid. They found Ingrid's wallet, phone, and other personal items, including her driver's license, but no sign of Ingrid. It seemed unusual for her to leave without telling anyone. Worried, Jorga decided to report Ingrid missing to the authorities. As the investigation progressed, police spoke to Ingrid's friends and neighbors, eventually learning that she had mentioned going on a date with a man the night before. A neighbor also mentioned that Ingrid had recently started seeing a man named John, which was news to Jorga and Philip. Ingrid and Jorga had previously shared phone accounts, allowing Jorga to access Ingrid's call logs. When reviewing the logs, Jorge discovered that Ingrid had made multiple calls to a number registered in Montana. Jorge became suspicious and looked up the phone number online and discovered it was linked to John Robert Charlton's Facebook account. Concerned for Ingrid's safety, Jorge sent a text message to the number on Saturday, saying she had contacted 911 to report her daughter missing. John Charlton replied, looking surprised and asking what was going on. He explained that he and Ingrid had attended a Mariners game the previous day but then broke up because Ingrid needed to take care of her children early the next morning. Even though Jorge was repeatedly asking him to talk to the police, John Charlton refused to stop responding. The case reached a new turning point on April 9th, when a Seattle resident named Mike Novasio placed an emergency call to authorities. Mike reported that when he returned home, he noticed one of his recycling bins had an unusual weight, which had been left outside for collection on April 7th. Mike had noticed something was wrong and had decided to investigate. When he had opened the trash can, he had been shocked to find 3 clear plastic bags, one of which had appeared to contain human remains, which was why he had immediately called the authorities. When the police and medical examiner had arrived, they had carefully examined the contents of the bags. Inside, they had found a human head, a foot, an arm, and a leg. Although the remains had shown no signs of decomposition, facial features had still been recognizable, allowing them to identify the remains as those of Ingrid. In the following days, more of Ingrid's remains had been found. Some had been discovered at a recycling facility, while others had been found in coolers at another location. Unfortunately, not all of Ingrid's remains had been found. During a search of Ingrid's home, police had found tickets to a Mariners game on her laptop dated April 8th. It had been believed that Ingrid and John had attended the game scheduled for 7:10 p.m. on April 11th. As a result, John had been arrested and taken for questioning. During interrogation, John had admitted knowing Ingrid and said they had been dating for about a month after meeting online. He had usually spent the night at her place. But on this particular night, he hadn't because her children would be home the next day. John had claimed that he had gone to a bar with Ingrid after the Mariners game and then driven back to her home in Renton in her car. He had said he had been very drunk and didn't remember much of what had happened after that. He had remembered having sex with Ingrid and her acting strangely, but his memory of the rest of that night had been unclear. When asked what he had done afterward, John had said he wasn't sure, but he had thought he might have slept on a sidewalk in downtown Seattle and woken up there the next morning. He guessed that Ingrid had dropped him off downtown before leaving. John had told authorities he was struggling with alcoholism and had no fixed residence. A physical examination had been conducted and John's injuries had been documented with photographs. He had had scratches on his left hand and forehead, cuts on his mouth and chin, and scratches on his chest. His ex-girlfriend had said she had seen him on April 9th and had noticed his lip was swollen and injured. John had explained his injuries by saying he had been robbed, but this had aroused suspicion among investigators due to John still having his wallet. Ingrid's car had been found by law enforcement in Belltown, a neighborhood near Seattle, on April 20th. However, this discovery raised a contradiction with John's original statement. John had claimed that Ingrid had dropped him off in downtown Seattle and then had driven back home, but evidence from the car had shown otherwise. Police had discovered trash bags in the car that were identical to the bags containing Ingrid's body parts. 3 fingerprints on the driver's door handle had matched John's, leading to his arrest on suspicion of having killed Ingrid and having stolen her car. John's arrest had been based largely on circumstantial evidence. Despite this, he had pleaded not guilty, and his defense team had argued that there had been no direct physical evidence linking him to Ingrid's murder. Initially denying involvement, John had eventually changed his plea to guilty before the trial had begun. During court proceedings, the prosecution had alleged that John had strangled Ingrid at her home and then had used a pruning saw to dismember her body in the bathtub. John had allegedly dumped Ingrid's body in multiple locations in Seattle. At her residence, police had found a nearly empty package of plastic bags identical to those containing her body. In the bathroom, authorities had discovered a 15-inch pruning saw, suspected to have been the tool used to dismember her body. They had also found human remains underneath the bathtub during their investigation. John had been sentenced to just over 27 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under state sentencing discretion. However, Judge Julie Spector had wanted to impose a life sentence because John's actions had been too serious. When given the opportunity to speak, John had apologized to the court and Ingrid's family, and had said that he truly regretted his evil and cruel behavior. John had had a long history of run-ins with the law, including convictions for serious crimes such as aggravated robbery, felony theft, and assault. He had also been arrested for theft. However, it had been his behavior at home that had worried his parents the most. In 2006, John's parents had felt threatened by their son's actions and had obtained a temporary protective order against him. According to court records, John had been struggling with the pressures of life and had been experiencing psychological instability. On March 2, 2006, he had been drunk and aggressive, trying to fight with his parents at his home. His behavior, not only in words but also in actions, had posed a threat to their safety. John's parents had been concerned about his possible cocaine use and his tendency to hold grudges for years. They had also noticed that when he had been drunk or on drugs, he had become scary, making them fear for their safety. One incident that stands out is when John had forced his mother to watch the movie Hannibal and had warned her to watch this and be careful. This behavior had been disturbing and had added to their concerns. Despite initial concerns, John's parents had eventually asked that the protective order be withdrawn. Following Ingrid's murder, the grief experienced by her family and friends had been immense, reflecting the loss of a caring mother, daughter, and friend. In the wake of Ingrid's tragic death, the community had come together to support her family, demonstrating strength through adversity. Ingrid's memory would continue to live on in the hearts of those who had known and loved her. Her story served as a reminder to prioritize safety and caution when meeting people online. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Hadley. Michelle Hadley was born on December 20th, 1986 in Upland, California. Michelle was the eldest daughter of her parents who were business owners. She grew up with a sister who's 3 years younger than her. Michelle was raised in a strict conservative home and shared a close relationship with her parents. Growing up, she had a pretty normal life. During her time at school and college, her friends knew her as a polite and kind person. Michelle was known for speaking her mind and addressing conflicts directly. Since childhood, she had been diligent in completing tasks, a trait that continued throughout her high school years. In high school, Michelle was in a long-term relationship with a single person whose identity remains unknown. The relationship led to marriage in 2008, but 4 years later, the marriage began to unravel. They decided to separate, which left Michelle heartbroken and questioning her ability to find love again. However, in 2013, she met Ian Diaz, a man she met through a dating site. Ian, who was working as a deputy U.S. Marshal at the time, was attentive and loving, drawing Michelle in. They eventually moved in together in the fall of 2014. Ian proposed to Michelle, and they set a wedding date. Initially, their marriage seemed perfect, but over time, Ian's behavior changed dramatically. Michelle had always seen Ian as a kind and attentive partner, but he slowly became loathing and abusive. At first, Michelle struggled to recognize these changes, mistaking them for acts of love. Ian began making requests that made Michelle uncomfortable, such as asking her to wear more revealing clothes. Despite her conservative upbringing, Michelle complied with his demands. Too easily, Ian made increasingly provocative demands. He asked her to get her navel pierced and she finally agreed. Ian's requests became more bizarre and controlling. He asked Michelle to quit her job at a marketing firm, which she loved, and take a job at Disneyland, a place he had worked at before becoming a deputy U.S. Marshal. Ian claimed he wanted Michelle to be in a safer environment, but in reality, he wanted to keep a close eye on her every move, using his connections at Disneyland to monitor her activities. Michelle was initially taken aback by her husband's unusual request, but she wanted to make him happy, so she agreed to go along with it. However, as time passed, Michelle began to feel uneasy about the situation and realized she was changing into someone she wasn't. She thought about discussing her concerns with her husband, but when she tried to talk to him, he became defensive and abusive. Around this time, Michelle and her husband, Ian, decided to buy a condo together. They thought owning a place would strengthen their relationship. This was about 2 years after they met in 2015. After searching, they found a condo in downtown Anaheim that they loved, but it was a bit pricey at $470,000. Although it was a stretch for their budget, they wanted the condo. What Michelle didn't know at the time was that Ian had no intention of contributing to the mortgage payments. Michelle and Ian had been experiencing relationship problems, but things took a turn for the worse when they bought a condo together. Ian claimed he was having financial difficulties and couldn't contribute to the down payment, which was $144,000 in cash. Michelle paid the entire amount and also made the mortgage payments, despite both their names being on the deed. Their relationship continued to deteriorate, and one incident turned violent, with Ian raising his hand to Michelle, causing her slight injuries. She drafted an email to her sister about the abuse but never sent it. By the summer of 2015, Michelle decided to leave the condo and move in with her parents. However, she was still responsible for paying the mortgage, which Ian continued to neglect. This enraged Michelle, especially since she had left her high-paying job and was working at Disneyland for less pay. When Michelle tried to contact Ian about the missed mortgage payments, he ignored her emails, calls, and texts. This lack of response pushed Michelle to her limit, and she decided to confront Ian directly. Ian revealed that he had no intention of paying the mortgage on the condo he shared with Michelle. This admission enraged Michelle, who was already struggling with the situation. She sent Ian a strongly worded email, warning him that his behavior would have serious consequences. Ian responded by filing a restraining order against Michelle, but the police did not fully support his claim, as he was also at fault. When Michelle discovered Ian's restraining order request, she countered with evidence that he had never paid the mortgage on their jointly owned condo. They eventually agreed to hire property lawyers to resolve the issue. The court ultimately ruled in Michelle's favor, ordering Ian to pay the outstanding mortgage balance and imposing an additional penalty if he failed to comply. Ian was upset by the judgment but was forced to abide by the court's decision. The dispute took a year to resolve, and by 2016, Michelle and Ian had separated for good. Michelle was finally free from the toxic relationship, while Ian was left. He was still living in the condo and paying the mortgage, which had taken a significant toll on him. In an effort to move on, Ian started using dating apps again, which is how he met Angela Connell. Although little is known about Angela, it is known that she was born in 1985 in Phoenix, Arizona, attended a Catholic high school, and graduated from Arizona State University in 2006. Ian and Angela met in January 2016, and their connection was immediate. Within a month, Ian proposed, and Angela moved into his condo. Everything seemed perfect for they. By May 2016, Angela was pregnant with twins, and Ian was overjoyed. However, their happiness was short-lived. Angela received an anonymous email that read, "You're not the right person for Ian." The message shook Angela, and she couldn't help but think of her ex, Jason Rayburn, with whom she had a tumultuous relationship before meeting Ian. But there was one problem: Angela had cut off all contact with Jason after their breakup, so it seemed impossible for him to know about her new relationship with Ian. The email's origin and intentions remained a mystery. Ian and Angela were still living in the condo that Michelle had purchased. One day, Ian brought up the topic of the condo in a conversation with Angela, and she suddenly realized that Michelle might be the one who had sent her an anonymous email. Shortly after, Angela started receiving more emails from 6 different accounts, all with the same message but worded differently. Curious about the sender's identity, Angela replied to one of the emails and asked who was behind them. To her surprise, the response claimed to be from Michelle. Angela told Michelle to stop contacting her, but the emails continued. The next few emails Angela received made her feel threatened and worried for her safety. Fearing for her life, Angela decided to take action and filed a restraining order against Michelle on June 1, 2016. In her statement to the police, Angela explained that Michelle's emails had filled her with fear and anxiety. She was afraid to leave her home because of the threats and was worried that she might be attacked and killed if she stepped outside. The court took Angela's concerns seriously and immediately granted the restraining order against Michelle. In June 2016, Michelle appeared to have moved on from her past relationship. One evening, she met a friend and was returning home when she was met by a team of police officers in her driveway. Michelle was taken aback but cooperated with the officers and was taken in for questioning regarding the restraining order. During the interrogation, Michelle was questioned about her connection to Angela and the threatening emails sent from her email address. Michelle claimed she had never heard of Angela and was unaware of the emails. She also stated that she believed she was being set up, as she had recently received alerts from Google and Microsoft indicating that her email address had been compromised. Specifically, her email address had been shut down, and she had been notified that it was being used as a recovery email for multiple unknown email accounts. Michelle suspected that her ex-husband might be impersonating her and had reported her concerns to the Anaheim Police Department. However, the police officers did not take her claims seriously. Despite Michelle's denials, she was served with a restraining order. Unbeknownst to Michelle, this was only the beginning of a more complex situation. Shortly after, Angela started receiving emails responding to a Craigslist ad that she had not posted. The ad contained details soliciting a sexual coercion fantasy, which shocked Angela. She realized that someone must have created an account in her name, as the emails contained her exact personal details, including her phone number, condo address, and the breed of her dog. The only people who knew her condo's exact address were Ian and Michelle. Angela's fear resurfaced as she pondered the idea that the Craigslist ad might not have been Ian's doing. She became terrified, unwilling to leave her house, knowing that the perpetrator was aware of her address. The feeling of being constantly watched and not knowing who was responsible made her extremely uneasy. Days after the incident, on June 24, 2016, Angela was attacked. She was left with a bruised neck, ripped clothes, and a head injury from being slammed against the wall. Despite her condition, Angela managed to call 911. When the police asked if she recognized her attacker, Angela identified the person as Michelle. The police decided to take a stronger approach with Michelle and arrested her, as they believed a restraining order was not enough to prevent her from harming Angela. While in jail, Michelle managed to inform her parents about her arrest. Her parents, who were from a conservative background and were successful business owners, took immediate action to handle the situation. Michelle's bail was set at $10,000, which her parents were able to pay, securing her release. After Michelle's release, Angela began receiving harassing emails again. Although it seemed unlikely, the emails were actually sent from Michelle's personal email address. This raised questions about Michelle's involvement in the harassment. In another incident on July 13th, Angela contacted 911 after seeing a man standing outside her condo. When the police arrived, the stranger claimed to be responding to a sexually explicit Craigslist ad posted in Angela's name. The police investigated the origin of the ad and found that it led back to Michelle. This discovery raised more questions. Was Michelle lying to the police, or was someone else using her name to post the ad? The day after Michelle's second arrest on July 14th, the police set her bail at a staggering $1 million, an amount her parents couldn't afford to pay. Michelle strongly denied sending the threatening emails and creating the Craigslist ads, and her parents believed her, knowing she wasn't capable of such behavior. They decided to hire a lawyer, suspecting that whoever was behind the threats could continue to have Michelle arrested. During Michelle's second stint in jail, the threats and emails targeting Angela stopped again. 3 months passed, and it seemed like the situation had finally calmed down for Angela. Meanwhile, Michelle's parents were working tirelessly to uncover the identity of the person impersonating their daughter. To get to the bottom of the mystery, they needed to find out who had access to Michelle's records. After gathering data from her school, hospital, and other records, they discovered crucial evidence. It turned out that Michelle had been hospitalized in June, on the same day the first emails were sent. This revelation made it clear that Michelle couldn't have sent those emails herself. Michelle's parents were given new hope when they received information that led them to believe their daughter was innocent. Michelle's father took matters into his own hands and downloaded software to track the IP addresses of the threatening emails, which were encrypted and difficult to trace. On September 30th, 2016, Ian appeared at the police station and presented the bail, securing Michelle's release. Michelle and her family were shocked and confused by Ian's actions, and they couldn't understand why he would bail her out after treating her poorly in the past. They wondered if Ian had suddenly developed a conscience or if there was more to the story. After Michelle's release, Ian revealed a shocking truth. He claimed that Angela had framed Michelle for sending the threatening emails. According to Ian, Angela had created proxy email addresses in Michelle's name and used them to send threatening emails to herself. This revelation raised more questions than answers, and Michelle and her family were left to wonder why Angela would do such a thing. Angela went so far as to post Craigslist ads pretending to be Michelle. These ads included personal details that only Ian and Angela would know. Further, Angela inflicted bruises on herself in June 2016, claiming someone had attacked her in her garage. However, Ian later found CCTV footage revealing the truth. Angela had self-inflicted the injuries. Ian discovered a history of Angela fabricating stories and making things up from the start of their relationship. Angela's deceit went so far as faking her pregnancy. She had even purchased a sonogram photo and positive pregnancy test. Ian investigated further to determine the root cause of Angela's obsessive and hurtful actions against Michelle. Angela became aware of Michelle after meeting Ian in 2015, where Michelle and Ian came up frequently. As a result, Angela developed curiosity and eventually resentment toward Michelle after looking into Michelle's personal background, including the affluent community from which she hailed. Angela's discovery led her to view Michelle as a lucrative target. Meanwhile, Ian, Michelle's husband, harbored a deep-seated resentment towards Michelle due to a past condo dispute. The incident had left Ian fuming, particularly because he was forced to pay the mortgage after Michelle's countersuit. Seeking revenge, Ian and Angela formed an alliance to bring Michelle down. Ian provided Angela with Michelle's email address, and they began secretly plotting to frame Michelle and have her arrested. To conceal their scheme, they created multiple email addresses to communicate with each other. Using virtual private networks, VPNs, they created 6 fake accounts in Michelle's name. Unbeknownst to Michelle, these accounts were the source of the Google alerts she had reported to the police, which were actually created by Angela. When Michelle obtained a restraining order, Angela was dissatisfied, as her goal was to completely eliminate Michelle. In response, Angela devised a more elaborate plan. She created a fake Craigslist profile using Michelle's identity and posted an ad inviting men to her home for a sexual coercion fantasy. However, the inconsistencies in their plan ultimately led Ian to confess, inadvertently framing his own wife in the process. He was seemingly oblivious to the extent Angela would go far once the truth was out. The police obtained a search warrant for all of Angela's devices, and what they found was astonishing. The investigation revealed that all of Ian's claims were true. They discovered 21 threatening emails, most of which were sent from Angela and Ian's condo. Further investigation into the origins of the emails supposedly sent to Angela revealed that some were sent from Arizona. It was discovered that Angela had traveled to Arizona to visit her father during that time. The investigation into Angela's background began after these shocking discoveries. It was then that investigators found out that this was not the first time Angela had committed such an act. In 2013, Angela had committed similar crimes while dating Jason Rayburn, a state trooper from California. During their relationship, Angela claimed to be an attorney and said she had been diagnosed with cervical cancer. However, as time passed, Jason became suspicious as Angela's claims did not add up. He started digging deeper and was shocked to discover that Angela had fabricated both her cancer diagnosis and her career. On January 6, 2019, nearly 3 years after the truth came to light, Angela was arrested and charged for her crimes. The Orange County District Attorney's Office worked to clear Michelle's name, and 3 days later, her record was officially cleared of the false charges of making a threat to life and assault. As a result of the ordeal, Michelle had to drop out of her MBA program and lost her job. However, now that her name has been cleared, she is rebuilding her life. She has since completed her MBA and found a job in field marketing for a cosmetics company. Michelle has also moved to New York to start fresh and be closer to her sister. In contrast, Angela pleaded guilty to 10 felonies, including false imprisonment and perjury, and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Ian, who was involved with Angela, has since separated from her and sold their condo for $500,000. In 2021, Ian faced multiple charges for allegedly masterminding a plot to frame Michelle. In addition to receiving a 5-year prison sentence, he was charged with 1 count each of perjury, cyberstalking, and conspiracy to commit cyberstalking. This raises questions about the thoroughness of the initial investigation. If the investigators and police officers had scrutinized the situation more closely, perhaps the plot would not have progressed as far as it did. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Julie Minogue. Julie Minogue was born on July 19, 1982, in Goshen, New York, a charming town where she was raised by her loving parents, Gerald Minogue and Sandra Barish Doper. She grew up with a sister, Allison Barati Corcoran, and a brother, Peter Gerald Minogue. Throughout her school years, Julie excelled academically at Monroe Woodbury schools, ultimately graduating from Monroe Woodbury High School. She continued her education at Orange County Community College, expanding her knowledge and embracing new experiences. After completing her education, Julie Minogue became a dedicated medical assistant at Coastal Obstetrics and Gynecology in Connecticut. Julie prioritized an active lifestyle, enjoying running and walking to stay energized. She had 2 sons, Nicholas Keith Turner and Sean Michael Turner. Although the details about her marriage and husband are unknown, she has a strong bond between her and her sons. Julie Minogue found love again in 2017 with Ewan Anthony DeWitt from Roxbury. Together, they welcomed a son, Luke Anthony Minogue, in 2019. However, their relationship eventually fell apart, causing them to divorce. In 2021, she moved into an apartment on Salem Walk in Milford with her sons, putting their happiness first. By 2022, Julie's eldest son, Nicholas, was 21 and had bravely served in the Coast Guard. Her middle son, Sean, was a 17-year-old high school senior. Luke, her youngest son with Ewan, was 3 years old and brought joy to their household. Julie was 40, and life seemed to be going well for her and her 3 boys. However, tragedy struck her family. On the night of December 6, 2022, 17-year-old Sean Minogue was awoken by terrifying screams. At first, he thought the noise was an echo from the neighbor's house, but the crying became louder. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Sean rushed downstairs, concerned for his mother's safety. As he descended into the darkness, he caught a man wielding an axe, and his mother lying on the floor, covered in blood. Amidst the chaos, Sean heard the haunting words, "You didn't believe me," echoing in his mind. Sean quickly ran upstairs, locked his door, and called 911 to report the incident. He placed a chair behind the locked door and opened his window to seek help. Shortly after, he could hear the sound of sirens and people approaching. When he heard the police voice, he mistakenly thought there was an intruder, so he jumped out the window. The officers found the frightened teenager and ensured his safety. Meanwhile, police officers entered the kitchen and discovered Julie Minogue lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her face and skull had severe cuts. A large axe was found on the stove, indicating the severity of the crime. In the living room, Julie's 3-year-old son Luke was found sitting on the couch, seemingly in shock. He was unresponsive, neither crying nor speaking. An officer stayed with Luke and provided comfort until more police officers arrived at the scene. Following Julie's tragic death, her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for a thorough examination. After a meticulous autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the cause of her death was the severe chopped wounds and impact injuries to her head, torso, and extremities. The detailed findings have provided vital evidence about the attack and the cause of her death. As the police took custody of the evidence they found on the gas stove, they conducted a thorough search of the area to look for any potential evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. They searched every inch of the house, examining each room for any clues that could shed light on the crime. The investigation attracted the attention of concerned neighbors, who gathered nearby. They was eager to support the investigation in any way they could. A neighbor gave evidence with camera footage from outside his home at the Longmeadow complex. Police have investigated the footage, hoping it will provide vital clues. As they watched, they witnessed a person walking with an axe, closely matching the description Sean had provided. The police then began searching for the identity of the man with the axe. On December 6, 2022, a major breakthrough occurred when a woman called the police to report a phone call she received from her son. With a shaky voice, she shared the shocking revelation that her son had just told her that he had killed his girlfriend. The seriousness of her words prompted an immediate response from law enforcement. They quickly located the woman and engaged her in conversation. During the conversation, police discovered that the man responsible for the disturbing confession was Ewan, a 42-year-old man who had previously been in a relationship with Julie. With this important information, the police made efforts to contact Ewan. However, Ewan abruptly hung up the call. To better understand Ewan's background, the police investigated his history. Ewan was born in 1979 in Roxbury. He had a wide range of interests and pursuits. A skilled athlete, he was passionate about ice hockey and even played in semi-professional leagues. Ewan also holds a bachelor's degree in history from Siena College. Not satisfied with just one career, he also pursued a career as a firefighter, showing his ambition. In 2006, Ewan DeWitt's life took a tumultuous turn when he was arrested in Connecticut for driving under the influence and traffic offenses. After pleading guilty, he was given a suspended prison sentence and placed on probation. However, Ewan turned his life around in 2009 when he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. Over the course of 5 years, he distinguished himself as a skilled weapons specialist and non-commissioned officer, ultimately earning the rank of Lance Corporal. During his time in the Marines, Ewan served as a machine gunner and was part of the elite 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. A notable photo from his time in service shows him bravely operating a .50 caliber machine gun on a vehicle during a defense exercise. Ewan's leadership skills and expertise helped him become captain of the machine gun section. Ewan served multiple tours in combat zones, including Afghanistan and the Middle East, alongside his fellow Marines. His selfless dedication was highlighted in a 2015 article in the Registered Citizen. One notable incident occurred shortly after the birth of his son, when he was arrested for attacking Julie Minogue. According to reports, he threw a large object at her, destroying her phone and preventing her from calling for help. Fearing for her safety, Julie sought refuge at a neighbor's house and contacted the police. In addition, Ewan, while intoxicated, getting into a heated argument with Julie and throwing a playpen at her head, causing a serious injury. Their son witnessed this incident and provided a statement. After Ewan went to rehabilitation, Julie sought a restraining order to protect herself from his abusive behavior. The court granted her a protective order that allowed for limited contact. However, Ewan was still granted visitation rights, which created ongoing concerns for Julie and her family's safety. In addition to their personal struggles, Julie and Ewan became embroiled in a series of family court cases starting in 2021. Julie initiated proceedings by seeking child support for their son Luke. The court ruled in her favor in October 2021, ordering Ewan to provide financial support. Ewan retaliated by taking Julie to court seeking resolution on visitation rights. In an effort to mediate the situation, the court granted supervised visitation, with a further hearing scheduled for April 2023 to revisit the matter. Julie and Ewan's divorce leads to many problems. Just 3 weeks before her death, Julie took action by going to Milford Police Station on November 14, 2022. She filed a complaint against Ewan for allegedly sending her more than 200 text messages in just 2 days, violating a protective order prohibiting him from making contact. Officer Scott Nablin carefully collected evidence of the text messages from Julie Minogue's phone, which further strengthened the case against Ewan. In a statement, Julie expressed deep concern for her safety and the well-being of her children. She stated that she could no longer tolerate the abuse and was seeking protection. Julie detailed the ongoing harassment she had endured and her fear of Ewan's behavior. She mentioned that he had a history of trouble with drugs and alcohol and was worried that he might harm her. In the meantime, Julie Minogue sought a civil restraining order against Ewan. On December 1, 2022, she presented evidence to a judge, including text messages, Ewan's history of substance abuse and mental health issues, and his violent past. Julie expressed concern for Ewan's well-being and emphasized the need for him to receive therapy. She believed Ewan posed a threat to others and should not be allowed to interact with anyone until he received proper treatment. The judge granted Julie a no-contact restraining order on December 1, 2022, to protect her from Ewan. The police investigation focused on Ewan, and they thoroughly searched the area around the Salem Walk condominium. They also visited a dive bar on Ocean Avenue in West Haven, asking patrons for help and providing information about the ongoing investigation. They asked anyone who saw Ewan to contact the authorities. Soon after, witnesses discovered someone resembling Ewan. They immediately alerted the police, who then observed the suspect entering a food truck in a nearby parking lot. Police quickly surrounded the truck and apprehended Ewan without any resistance. During the interrogation, Ewan initially remained silent, but after hours of intense interrogation, he finally confessed to killing Julie with an axe. He admitted to entering her house through the kitchen window, hiding and waiting for her to arrive. When Julie entered the kitchen, Ewan attacked her with an axe. Julie's son, Nicholas, witnessed the terrifying scene as he came downstairs. Frightened, Ewan dropped the axe on the gas stove and fled. The details of the incident, as revealed by Ewan, sent shockwaves through the investigation and provided a disturbing account of the events that occurred that night. During Ewan's first court appearance on December 7, 2022, Assistant State's Attorney Alana Paul updated the judge on the case. She said that Ewan confessed to the crime, but even if he did not, the evidence against him was compelling. Given the severity of the case, Paul argued that a significant sentence was necessary. Judge Odin Grogan set Ewan DeWitt's bond at $5 million due to concerns about his history of ignoring court orders and the need to prioritize public safety. As a result, Ewan was placed under surveillance. A hearing was scheduled for December 14, 2022, to further address the case. On December 14, 2022, Ewan faced multiple charges, including murder, violating a protective order, violating a restraining order, risking injury to a minor, and reckless endangerment. These charges aim to hold Ewan accountable for the full scope of his actions. A hearing for his pending cases was set for April 6, 2023. The family of the victim has released a statement, vowing to take action and hold accountable those who failed to protect their loved one. They hope that this case will lead to improved safeguards for individuals experiencing domestic violence and abuse. The family is committed to creating positive change and preventing similar tragedies from happening in the future. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Scott Ponder. Scott Dean Ponder was born on February 7, 1973, to a loving family. His mother, Beverly Guy, and stepfather, Terry Guy, encouraged his passion for cars and motorcycles from a young age. They supported his development as a rider and even helped him obtain a racing license as soon as he was eligible. Scott's talent and dedication earned him recognition, including numerous admirers and local hero status in Chesney. Scott was a sociable person who enjoyed spending time with many people, and they enjoyed his company as well. In the late 1990s, Scott started repairing bikes in his grandmother's backyard, which eventually led to the establishment of Superbike Motorsports. The business expanded to a one-garage building in 2001, and Scott brought in his best friend, Brian Lucas, as a partner. They partnered to obtain a Suzuki dealership, resulting in swift expansion and achievement. Brian, who initially worked part-time when the business first started, left his job to become the store's full-time manager. Through their dedication and expertise, the duo attracted numerous customers, and the business began to flourish. Despite being salesmen, they prioritized educating their customers about bikes and racing. Scott's mother, Beverly Guy, who initially visited the store occasionally, began to visit regularly and eventually took on responsibilities such as accounting, payroll, and cash management. With the trio's combined efforts, the business thrived, selling 100,000 motorbikes every month. Scott attended an industry convention in Chicago, where he met his future wife, Melissa Brackman, a former homecoming queen from Stafford High School. They instantly connected and enjoyed each other's company, leading to frequent meetups as their relationship deepened. Eventually, they decided to get married, and their love life, both before and after the wedding, resembled a fairy tale, with their love growing stronger each day. I met Scott at a motorcycle show in Indianapolis, where he struck me as a kind and charming Southern gentleman. My feelings for him developed rapidly, and I soon realized I was in love with him. Scott and I decided to start a family, but we struggled to conceive. We sought medical help, and after months of trying, I finally became pregnant with a baby boy. In October 2003, I discovered I was pregnant while visiting my hometown. I took a pregnancy test at my brother's house without telling anyone, and I was overjoyed when the test was positive. Scott was thrilled when I shared the news with him. Around the same time, Scott's business was booming, with millions of dollars in sales in the first year. To keep up with the demand, he expanded his store and hired a new mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Chris was well, known in town for his exceptional wrench skills, which caught Scott's attention. Scott, Beverly, Brian, and Chris formed a talented team that gained recognition beyond their small town of Chesney. Scott Ponder's life was going smoothly until disaster struck. November 6, 2003, was a sunny day, but the atmosphere at Superbike Motorsports was vastly different. You might remember where you were on that day. I recall it clearly. I had spoken to Scott around 2:15 p.m., and our conversation was brief and normal. He said goodbye, and that was the last time we spoke. Scott and the others began their day at the shop as usual. The store had a few customers browsing, including Kelly Sisk and his 4-year-old son. Kelly was there to purchase a go-kart for his family, and after completing the transaction, he lingered in the shop for a bit. Brian was supposed to be on holiday with his family, but Scott called him in to address a customer complaint about a neglected bike. Brian arrived at the shop and immediately started working on the bike. Meanwhile, Scott was helping another customer when his mother, Beverly, stopped by. She had just taken Scott's cancer-stricken grandmother to chemotherapy and was planning to deposit money into Scott's account at the bank later that day, around 2:30 p.m. Beverly lent a hand to Scott at the counter, assisting him with his tasks. Scott's friend Noel called the Superbike Motorsports shop, also known as the shop. Beverly answered the phone and agreed to let Noel stop by, which he said would take only 7 minutes. After hanging up, Beverly went to use the bathroom. Within those 7 minutes, a tragic event unfolded. Scott, Brian, Beverly, and Chris, the 4 people present at the shop, were brutally shot and killed. The shooting occurred at 3 p.m. inside the Superbike Motorsports premises. When Scott's friend Noel arrived, he found Scott and Brian lying motionless at the front of the shop. Initially, Noel thought they were playing a prank and even kicked them, telling them to stop joking around. However, upon seeing the pool of blood beneath their bodies, he quickly realized the gravity of the situation and called 911. Noel reported the incident to the emergency operator, stating that everyone at the shop had been shot and was lying in a pool of blood, including his mom, the mechanic, and the owner. The police and paramedics rushed to the scene, as this was the first quadruple murder in the small town of Chesney. The news spread rapidly, drawing not only the victims' families but also a crowd of onlookers to the crime scene. The police launched an immediate investigation and began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They discovered Chris's body at the back of the shop, positioned as if he had been working on a bike just before being killed. Beverly's body was found inside the shop, near the bathroom, suggesting she was ambushed as she exited. The bodies of Brian and Scott were located at the front of the store, with Brian's closer to the door and Scott's closer to a parked car. It appeared that both men had attempted to flee after hearing gunshots and encountering the shooter, but were unsuccessful. A thorough search of the crime scene by the police and forensic team yielded blood samples and other evidence. The killings were determined to be an execution-style homicide, with the shooter intentionally targeting the victims and shooting them at close range in the chest and head. Melissa, Scott's wife, received a call about the shooting and rushed to the scene. Detectives launched a thorough investigation and quickly found their first lead. Several passers-by reported seeing a couple lingering near the shop around the time of the murder. The detectives created sketches of the suspects based on the eyewitnesses' descriptions and distributed the pictures throughout South Carolina. The detectives initially suspected that the man and they was the shooter, and that he had attacked Chris and Beverly from behind while she distracted Scott and Brian at the front of the shop. However, this was only a theory, and no concrete evidence supported it. Despite months of searching, the police were unable to find any new leads. As media coverage intensified, detectives re-examined the case from a different angle, which ultimately led to a breakthrough. The detectives began to scrutinize the victims' pasts and lifestyles. While Scott, Beverly, and Brian appeared to be clean, Chris, the mechanic, had a more complex background. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Chris had previously worked for a company with ties to the drug trade. It was also revealed that Chris may have been involved in smuggling and was set to appear in court the following Monday, prior to the murders. In 2003, the police were actively working to combat a growing drug problem, particularly among young people. With Chris's connection to the drug trade now apparent, detectives and the public began to question whether the motive behind the quadruple homicide was to kill Chris specifically, with the other victims being unintentional casualties. It was also speculated that Chris's scheduled court appearance may have been a motive for his murder, as those involved in the drug business may have believed he would testify against them. Although this theory seemed plausible, particularly given that Chris was the first to be shot, there was no concrete evidence to support it. As a result, the investigation once again stalled. The case remained unsolved for an entire year, until the detectives decided to approach it from a fresh perspective. The detectives discovered that Brian, a friend and co-worker of Scott's, had been searching for a new house weeks before the murder. However, his wife Robin claimed to have had no knowledge of this decision. This revelation raised suspicions about the state of their marriage. Brian's mother, Lorraine Lucas, later revealed that their marriage was unhappy and strained, and that Brian had been planning to leave Robin to live alone. Lorraine recalled a tense encounter between Brian and Robin, during which Robin made faces behind Brian's back, leading to a confrontation when Brian asked her to treat his mother with respect. While this incident may not have seemed directly related to the shooting at first, it would later become a crucial piece of the puzzle. The quadruple murder was a catastrophic event that left the families of the 4 victims deeply traumatized and devastated. Melissa, in particular, struggled to cope with the loss of her beloved husband. Her life was once flawless, but a devastating event changed everything, leaving her to put the shattered remains back together. Despite her grief, Melissa found the strength to carry on for the sake of her newborn son, Scott Ponder Jr., who was born in June 2004. The police continued to call on Melissa for questioning, but she remained strong for her child's sake. In a surprising turn of events, the police obtained a DNA sample from Scott Ponder Jr.'s diaper, which was collected after Melissa had changed him at the station. The results of the DNA test shocked everyone, revealing that Ponder Jr.'s DNA matched Brian's, not Scott's. This discovery sparked tension between Melissa and her father-in-law, William Ponder, who repeatedly questioned her about the truth. Melissa was told that the detectives believed they had evidence linking her to the crime, and she was given a clear warning: if the proof implicated her, they would come for her wherever she was. As the investigation continued, the detectives began to focus on a possible love triangle between Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Rumors about Melissa's infidelity soon spread throughout the neighborhood, further complicating the case. Brian's mother considered the possibility of him having an affair due to his unhappiness in marriage and the thought of divorce. However, Melissa consistently denied any involvement with Brian and affirmed Scott Ponder's child's paternity, stating that she and Scott Ponder had struggled to conceive. Melissa was certain that the child belonged to her and Scott, and she remained convinced even after being questioned multiple times. For a year and a half, detectives monitored Melissa's every move, searching for a lead. Then, after 18 months, they revealed a startling discovery: the blood sample collected from the crime scene contained an error. A DNA test showed a match between Brian and Beverly's DNA, which should not be the case since Scott was Beverly's son, not Brian. Realizing their mistake, detectives understood that the blood samples from Scott and Brian had been mislabeled due to their close proximity at the crime scene. The discovery cleared Melissa's name regarding the love triangle theory, and detectives began to investigate a connection between the Superbike Motorsports homicide and another murder that occurred just 30 meters away, 5 months earlier. On May 16, 2003, a triple homicide shook the town of Greer, South Carolina. The incident took place at the Blue Ridge Savings Bank, where Sylvia Holtzclaw was due to start her shift. However, a local couple, Dee and Maggie Barnes, visited the bank at around 1:30 p.m. A 911 call was made to the Greer Police Department, reporting a shooting at the bank. Unfortunately, Sylvia, Dee, and Maggie were found shot to death. The Greer Police Department received a distress call from the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. One of the responding officers described the scene, noting that they were among the first to arrive. Like the Superbike Motorsports incident, the shooting occurred in broad daylight with no witnesses present. After reviewing the CCTV footage, police observed a red car driving towards the bank at 1:24 p.m. and leaving 3 minutes after the incident. A red car was spotted driving to a bank on Frontage Road at 1:24 p.m. 3 minutes later, the Barnes family was seen driving in the same area. Coincidentally, a similar red car was seen at the scene of a quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports. Detectives began searching for the red car and discovered it had been stolen from a rental lot by 39-year-old Emerson Wright days before the homicide. Police believed Emerson had entered the bank to rob it, but panicked and shot a couple who tried to intervene. However, detectives were unable to question Emerson about the bank and Superbike Motorsports murders due to a series of events that unfolded 2 years later. Emerson was wanted for a string of burglaries in the Atlanta area when he was chased by a state trooper. He crashed his car, got out, and shot himself in the head with a single gunshot wound. Although detectives noted similarities between their cases, they did not believe they were connected. The quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports in 2003 went cold just months later, leaving the victims' families, including Melissa, without any answers for 13 long years. Despite the lack of progress, Melissa and the other families of the victims refused to give up, tirelessly searching for any lead that might uncover the truth behind the gruesome crime. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing. However, in 2016, the case was reopened after detectives made a breakthrough. This development brought new hope to the families, 13 years after the crime had taken place. The man behind the quadruple murder finally emerged when he was arrested for an unrelated crime. During his interrogation, he confessed to the Superbike Motorsports murders. The killer was 45 years old Todd Kohlhepp, born on March 7, 1971, to parents Reggie and William. After his parents' divorce when he was just 2 years old, Todd began living with his mother and her new partner, but he often sought to spend more time with his biological father. Todd's behavior was extremely aggressive and volatile, particularly when he was young. He struggled with controlling his anger, which often led to violent outbursts. During his time in nursery school, he killed a goldfish with bleach and shot a dog with a BB gun. Despite spending 3.5 months in a psychiatric hospital in Georgia, his behavior showed no signs of improvement. As a last resort, his mother, Ray G., sent him to live with his father, William, in the hopes that a change of environment would help him manage his behavior. However, this change had little effect. At the age of 15, Todd planned and executed the kidnapping of 14-year-old Christy Granado in Tempe, Arizona, on November 25, 1986. Todd knocked on Christy's door, threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, and forced her to follow him to his home. Once there, he tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and assaulted her. After the assault, he walked her home and threatened to kill her entire family if she told anyone about the incident. However, Christy confided in her parents, who immediately called 911. As a result, Todd was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. Todd was sentenced to 15 years in prison and was required to register as a sex offender. When Todd was released, he was a reformed person and he turned over a new leaf, started his own business, and even got a job. For a long time, there were no more complaints filed against him. However, in 2016, a disturbing incident occurred. On August 31, 2016, 30-year-old Carla Brown and her 32-year-old boyfriend, Charlie David Carver, went missing after they were last seen visiting Todd's house to remove brush from one of his properties. Investigations led to a horrific discovery on November 3, 2016, when Carla was found chained to a wall inside a metal storage container on Todd's property. Further investigations uncovered the body of Charlie, which had multiple gunshot wounds. Carla reported to detectives that Todd had shot Charlie and kept her captive, regularly assaulting her brutally and threatening her not to try to escape. Todd was arrested and taken in for questioning. During the interrogation, he confessed to being the one responsible for a shooting that occurred at Superbike Motorsports 13 years earlier. On November 5, 2016, Todd was brought in for questioning and recounted the events of November 6, 2003, in a matter-of-fact way, without showing any signs of fear or guilt. According to Todd, on November 6, 2003, he bought a Suzuki GSX-R 750 from Superbike Motorsports, but soon realized he couldn't ride it due to his lack of experience. He decided to exchange the bike for a more beginner-friendly model. However, this exchange didn't happen on the same day. Todd told the detectives that his friends Scott and Brian teased him about his inability to ride the bike. After the bike theft, which occurred 14 days after the purchase, Todd filed a police report, but the bike was never recovered. Adding to his frustration, the police officer handling the case made fun of him, and neither the police nor the shop contacted him about the stolen bike or the $1,000 insurance deposit he had lost. Todd began attending college at Greenville Tech, but his interest in bikes never waned. He found himself returning to Superbike Motorsports, where he had previously shopped. However, his interactions with two employees, Scott and Chris, turned negative. According to Todd, they would mock and laugh at him whenever he visited the shop. One day, Todd decided to take revenge on they men. He waited until the shop was empty, except for Scott, Chris, Beverly, and himself. Then, he shot and killed the 4 people he had encountered. Todd later claimed that Beverly was not his intended target, but rather an innocent bystander who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The victims' families finally found some closure and justice after 13 years, thanks to Todd's confession. In addition to the killings at Superbike Motorsports, Todd confessed to murdering Johnny, Joe, and Megan Lee Coxey, and Charlie David Carver, all of whom died from gunshot wounds. Despite being a serial killer, Todd did not face a trial. Instead, prosecutors negotiated a plea deal with him after consulting with the victims' families and a survivor. As part of the deal, the state offered Todd a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, which he accepted just 7 months after his arrest. Todd was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences on May 23, 2017. In addition to these life sentences, he received 30 years for assault and 30 years for kidnapping. However, the fact that Todd pleaded guilty without a trial left many, including the victims' families, feeling that justice had not been fully served. The case also outraged the general public, who felt that the long wait for justice was unfair. Seventh Circuit Solicitor Barry Barnett expressed the frustration felt by many, stating that families should not have to wait years for justice. However, for Melissa, the wife of victim Scott Ponder, the sentencing brought a sense of relief and closure. She and other family members of the victims came together to hold a vigil in memory of their loved ones. After 13 years of pain and suffering, the victims' families finally had the answers they had been seeking about what had happened to their loved ones. In an interview, Melissa expressed her skepticism about Todd's motive for the murders, stating that she did not believe that her husband would have behaved in a way that would have provoked Todd. She recalled the kindness and good humor of Scott and another victim, Brian, and found it hard to believe that Todd's claims about their behavior were true. While Melissa was grateful that justice had been served, she felt that Todd's lack of remorse and casual demeanor during the investigation and court proceedings were disturbing. Many members of the public felt that Todd's crimes were so heinous that he deserved the death penalty. Todd's actions were heinous, and his lack of remorse is shocking. During the interrogation, he spoke about the murders in a casual, matter-of-fact way, as if recalling a past memory. This was truly despicable. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Susan Reinert. Susan Reinert, known to many as Sue, was born in 1943 in the town of Ridgeway, northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents, William and Jane Gallagher, were a significant influence on her early life. Her father managed a newspaper, while her mother was a dedicated school teacher, which later shaped her path. As a child, Susan demonstrated a clear passion for learning and a natural love for literature, following in her mother's footsteps. She pursued higher education at Grove City College, where she met Kenneth Reinert, a young Air Force enlistee. Their chance encounter blossomed into a romance as they studied together. Susan's determination paid off as she earned her bachelor's degree. After achieving her initial goal, Susan pursued further education, earning a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University in 1966. She had married Kenneth in 1965, shortly after graduating from Grove City College, and they began a life filled with adventure as a military couple, moving to various duty stations across the country. Their military life took them to different parts of the country, including Sacramento, California, Rome, New York, and even Puerto Rico, before they eventually settled in the Philadelphia region. However, in 1971, Susan and Kenneth decided to separate, marking the end of their marriage. Despite the divorce, they parted ways amicably, without any legal disputes. As a single mother, Susan focused on creating a warm and loving home for her two children, Karen and Michael. She was a dedicated teacher and a beloved colleague and educator at Chestnut Walled Elementary School, known for her friendly and warm nature. Outside of her professional life, Susan was actively involved in Parents Without Partners, playing a crucial role in the Valley Forge chapter. After her mother's death, Susan found comfort in her connection with the organization Parents Without Partners. Despite facing challenges, she remained strong, relying on the organization for support. As she navigated her grief and a significant inheritance, her life became increasingly complex. However, she seemed to be managing well thanks to her strong ability to cope and a supportive network. On the evening of June 22, 1979, Susan and her two children spent what would be their last day together. Earlier that day, her son Michael had spent time with his father Kenneth, a personnel officer at Fidelity Bank. They had played in a father-son softball game, but left early when Susan arrived to pick Michael up around 8:30 p.m. Later that evening, Michael called his father to apologize for leaving the game early. Susan also called her former in-laws, Florence and John Reinhardt, with whom she remained close despite her divorce. With a full tank of gas, Susan was prepared for the drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania, about an hour north. She planned to attend a Parents Without Partners conference and use the trip as a weekend getaway with her children. Susan had planned a weekend getaway with her two children, Karen, 11 years old, and Michael, 10 years old. They were supposed to leave on Saturday morning to attend events, but on Friday evening, around 9 p.m., they unexpectedly departed. The children had been outside collecting hailstones from a summer storm, and shortly after, neighbors heard Susan's car start up and saw it leave the driveway. Susan had been having an affair with William Bradfield, a fellow teacher, which had put a strain on her marriage to Kenneth. Rumors had circulated that Susan and Bradfield might get married. On June 22, 1979, Susan visited her boyfriend before embarking on a trip with her children to Allentown, about 49 miles north. They had planned to spend the night in a motel, but instead of arriving at their destination, Susan and her children vanished. 2 days after Susan Reinert and her children vanished, the community cared for them deeply was overcome with concern and uncertainty. On June 25, 1979, their fears were realized when Susan's orange Plymouth hatchback was found in the Hostin Hotel parking lot in Harrisburg, 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, her body was discovered in the back of the vehicle. The details of her death were horrific. Susan's body was found nude, battered, and bound in chains, curled up in the wheel well of her car. Her hands were tied, and she had 2 black eyes. It appeared that she had been either beaten with chains or tied so tightly that the chains had caused severe bruising on her back. To make matters worse, she had been given a lethal dose of morphine. The disappearance of her 2 children remained a mystery, however, with no signs of their whereabouts. Police were left searching for answers, with the children seemingly vanished into thin air. The police searched for hours, hoping to find Susan's children with a babysitter, but none of her regular sitters, friends, or family members had seen them that weekend. As a result, the police began investigating to find answers. To gather leads, the police published pictures of the Reinert family in newspapers for weeks. This was before the internet and Amber Alerts existed, making it more challenging to disseminate information quickly. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Susan Reinert had named William Bradfield, the man she believed she would marry, as the beneficiary of life insurance policies worth $730,000. This revelation raised suspicions that the children might have been killed to allow Bradfield to receive the substantial financial windfall. However, Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was at the beach in Cape May, New Jersey, during the weekend when Susan was killed and her children disappeared. Several other teachers were with him and could vouch for his whereabouts. The police then shifted their focus to Upper Marin High School, where Susan worked. The school was facing several difficulties and challenges. The principal, J.C. Smith, had been involved in a scandal. He had been fired the previous year, being arrested at a local shopping center, where a search of his Ford Granada revealed loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and various tools associated with burglary. Additionally, a syringe filled with morphine was found in his trunk. Jay's life was already unraveling before his wife's cancer diagnosis. In 1977, his wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, which she would eventually succumb to in August 1979. During her illness, she kept a diary, documenting her husband's increasingly bizarre behavior. Jay had begun engaging in consensual non-monogamous activities, including group sex and partner swapping, to which his wife strongly objected. This behavior seemed to be a precursor to even more alarming actions. Around the same time, their daughter, Stephanie, moved back in with her parents, bringing her husband Edward Hunsberger with her. The family was already dealing with the uncertainty of her mother's cancer battle, and tensions were running high among them. Edward Hunsberger and his wife Stephanie, Jay's daughter and son-in-law, struggled with heroin addiction and had trouble finding steady employment in the years leading up to their move. In an effort to escape their struggles with addiction, they moved back in with Jay family in early 1978. However, just a few months after the move, Stephanie and Edward mysteriously vanished. The last confirmed sighting of they was in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. Before leaving, they mentioned that they would return to visit soon. However, after this point, all contact with them ceased. Edward failed to appear at a scheduled meeting with his probation officer later that month, prompting authorities to begin searching for him and Stephanie. When investigators reached out to Jay for information, he claimed that they had left for California to escape debts owed to local drug dealers. Despite his assertions, Jay was unable to provide any further details about their disappearance. Edward and Stephanie had been constantly on the move, traveling from place to place and never staying in one location for too long, making it easy for them to disappear without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for theft, and a search of his home uncovered some disturbing items. Authorities found firearms, marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms and badges, as well as disturbing pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. Jay was linked to a string of recent armed robberies matching his description and attire. While awaiting sentencing for the theft charge, Jay's alibi witness, Bradfield, testified that they were on vacation during the time of the robberies. However, the jury did not find Bradfield's testimony credible. Jay had a notorious reputation at Upper Merion, earning him the nickname, the Prince of Darkness. This was especially relevant in the investigation of Susan's death, which was caused by strangulation or suffocation. The time frame for her death was broad, and when questioned about his whereabouts, Jay couldn't provide a clear answer. The autopsy found that Susan's body had an extremely high amount of morphine, roughly 10 times the amount needed to be fatal, which indicates that her overdose was likely a deliberate act. As the investigation into Susan's death continued, Jay was found guilty of a series of store robberies in the late 1970s. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison on June 25, 1979. However, even behind bars, Jay remained a key suspect in the investigation into Susan's death. The police began to dig deeper into his past, uncovering a disturbing discovery. Jay's daughter and son-in-law had gone missing in similar circumstances to Susan and her children. There were two main connections between Jay and the disappearances. Firstly, large quantities of morphine had been discovered in Jay's house a few months earlier. Secondly, a plastic comb with Jay's military unit was found in Susan's car. The disappearances of Jay's daughter and son-in-law shared striking similarities with the disappearance of Susan's children. The investigation revealed a shocking series of events that had a lasting impact on the public. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In late July 1979, about a month after Susan's body was discovered near Harrisburg, investigators stumbled upon a potential motive for the crime. In her official documents, Susan referred to Bradfield as her future husband. As the police investigated further, they determined that Susan's death occurred between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24. Bradfield and his colleagues arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday and stayed until Monday afternoon, June 25. However, there was a gap in Bradfield's alibi, as his exact whereabouts during the time of Susan's disappearance were unclear. Investigations also revealed that Susan had withdrawn large sums of money from her accounts, totaling around $25,000. She had told bank employees that she planned to invest the money in high-yielding investments managed by Bradfield, whom she trusted as her future husband. Unbeknownst to Susan, Bradfield was leading a double life, dating multiple women, including a fellow English teacher, with whom he had a secret relationship spanning nearly a decade. Bradfield had promised Susan that he would handle her investments and assured her they would be profitable, providing a way for they to fund their upcoming wedding and move to England. However, investigators found fake stocks and bonds in Susan's home, which were actually forgeries created by Bradfield. He had sold these worthless securities to Susan, using fictional companies to make them appear legitimate. This discovery added a new dimension to the narrative, revealing a significant financial motive. Bradfield was required to testify in a lawsuit in March 1980 but initially refused to answer questions, referring them to his lawyers instead. His lawyers denied any wrongdoing but were open to negotiating a settlement to resolve the matter and distribute Susan's estate, which was worth approximately $7 million. In June 1980, Bradfield testified in a civil trial, downplaying his involvement in the case. He contradicted Susan's claims about their relationship, saying it was not as serious as she had told others. He denied plans to marry Susan later that year, despite her having shared these plans with multiple people. Bradfield also made an unsubstantiated claim that Susan had an affair with Jay Smith, the former principal of her high school, but this accusation was not supported by any evidence. Friends and family members remembered Susan being in a long-term relationship with Bradfield, with no indication of a relationship with Jay Smith, who was actually in prison at the time of the trial. Bradfield failed to explain why Susan had named him the beneficiary of her $1 million estate. Instead, he portrayed Susan as an irresponsible person who frequently got into trouble, and he blamed her for her problems, claiming he was only trying to help her deal with the consequences. As the investigation into the missing $25,000 continued, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a second lawsuit in June 1980 to claim the $450,000 life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life just before her death. The goal was to use the funds to conduct a private investigation. However, the case took a surprising turn when Bradfield was arrested on February 20, 1981, and charged with 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy related to the $25,000. Wendy Ziegler, a former student of Bradfield's, was also charged as a co-conspirator in the case. Bradfield was released on bail on February 23, 1981, and was set to go on trial the following month. However, the trial was preempted when the original civil lawsuit was settled out of court. As a result of the settlement, $36,000 from Susan's estate was set aside to cover the costs of further investigations into the disappearance of the children and to contest certain provisions of Susan's will. Bradfield's 5-day trial ended on August 3, 1981, with a guilty verdict for theft. The prosecutor, Edward Weiss, requested that Bradfield's bond be increased from $25,000 to $75,000 due to concerns that the conviction would increase the risk of him fleeing, particularly in light of potential murder charges. Judge Robert A. Wright granted this request. On April 6, 1983, Pennsylvania state troopers arrested Bradfield and charged him with multiple crimes, including 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and obstructing the law. A grand jury found evidence that Bradfield was aware of the plot to kill Susan and her children and had likely participated in these crimes. Although J.C. Smith, a suspected accomplice, was not charged at that time, a confession from a fellow inmate, Proctor Knoll, implicated Bradfield. Knoll stated that while playing chess with Bradfield in prison, Bradfield revealed his involvement in the murders. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence linking Bradfield to the crimes, prosecutors felt they had a strong case against him. A previous conviction for theft also bolstered their confidence, as did a potential connection to a person who may have disposed of the victims' bodies, which further implicated Bradfield in the murders that occurred in the 1980s. J.C. Smith was forced to testify before a grand jury in 1984, despite invoking his Fifth Amendment right. The questioning was likely related to the disappearance of his daughter, Stephanie, and her husband, Edward Huntsberger. Around the same time, William Bradfield was also called to testify, but the details of his statements were not made public. In April 1985, J.C. Smith was asked to provide handwriting samples that may have been linked to documents written years earlier, possibly outlining a plan to murder Susan Leinert. This led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan's body was found. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody. While Jay awaited trial, a book about the case was published by crime author Joseph Wambaugh in 1984, suggesting that Smith was the killer. The book was later adapted into a TV miniseries, drawing national attention to the case. Despite this, Jay maintained his innocence from prison, filing appeals and claiming that William Bradfield had framed him. In 1989, the court decided to re-examine Jay's case and discovered problems with the prosecution's handling of the case. This led to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a thorough investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, overturning his murder conviction due to issues with the prosecution's conduct. For 20 years, the state did not pursue a new trial against J.C. Smith, allowing him to live the rest of his life without further prosecution. Meanwhile, William Bradfield continuously disregarded court orders and refused to pay the $25,000 he owed to the estate of Susan Reinert. This issue was finally resolved in a settlement in 1996. J.C. Smith went on to file lawsuits against the state and Joseph Wambaugh, claiming defamation and conspiracy. However, both suits were eventually dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, who had been in prison for over a decade, was found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead due to cardiac arrest. Kenneth Reinert, the ex-husband of Susan Reinert, passed away in June 2002 without ever knowing what happened to their two missing children. J.C. Smith, whose conviction was overturned in 1992, wrote books about the case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009, leaving many questions about his involvement in the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Huntsberger, still unanswered. Detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Emmett Corrigan. Ashley Harmon was a vibrant and intelligent individual. However, her parents' divorce when she was 9 years old marked the beginning of a challenging period in her life. During this time, Ashley took on a maternal role, caring for and protecting her 5 siblings. Faith is the foundation of her life. As a devoted member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ashley found strength and comfort in her relationship with God. Whenever she faced adversity, her faith provided her with the resilience to persevere. Ashley's unwavering commitment to her faith gave her the courage to overcome obstacles and difficult situations head-on. In 2003, while studying human development at Utah State, Ashley met Emmett Corrigan, a philosophy student. Emmett, like Ashley, had experienced the pain of parental separation, having gone through a similar experience at the age of 10. He, too, found solace in the Mormon faith. Emmett was 17 years old when he was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, surrounded by his loved ones. Around that time, Ashley caught his eye, and he was immediately drawn to her intelligence. Emmett confided in his close friends that he was certain Ashley was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. As their relationship blossomed, Emmett proposed to Ashley during the 2008 Christmas season, just a few months after they met. Overjoyed, Ashley said yes, and they began making wedding plans. The couple exchanged vows in a Mormon temple, a ceremony that reflected their shared values. Their marriage brought joy and stability to their lives. In the Mormon faith, marriage is deeply revered as a sacred and eternal bond between two people. Mormons believe that this bond transcends mortality, continuing even after death. Divorce is discouraged but allowed in exceptional cases. In 2005, Ashley and Emmett welcomed twin daughters, marking the beginning of their parenthood journey. They were ecstatic to take on their new roles. Emmett cherished every moment spent with the girls, embracing fatherhood. Ashley was thrilled to be living her dream life. While attending Utah State University, the couple managed to balance childcare and educational responsibilities. Despite challenges, their faith and love helped them overcome obstacles. They persevered, striving for a better future. By 2009, Emmett graduated with high honors, then attended law school and passed the bar exam. He pursued a career as an attorney. Meanwhile, Ashley focused on raising their growing family, dedicating herself to household management and childcare for their 4 children. The Corrigan family appeared to have a perfect life to outsiders. They resided in a lovely home with multiple children, and Emmett had a rewarding career. However, their situation wasn't as ideal as it seemed. By August 2010, Emmett felt increasingly pressured to support his family financially, particularly with 4 young children under the age of 5. To solve this problem, he decided to start his own business, focusing on working as a criminal defense lawyer. A friend introduced Emmett to Candy Hall, a well-regarded paralegal with experience working for a criminal attorney. After a successful lunch meeting, Emmett hired Candy to work at his firm. At the time, Candy was married to Robert Hall, who was widely regarded as a devoted father and diligent worker. When Candy started working for Emmett Corrigan, she was initially excited, and her family was happy for her. However, as time passed, Emmett's wife, Ashley, began to notice that their marriage was changing. Emmett was under a lot of stress. To cope with the stress, Emmett started spending more time at the gym, which became an addiction for him. He went to the gym regularly, leaving Ashley alone to take care of the children. Despite the growing distance between them, Ashley and Emmett welcomed their 5th child, a son, on January 15, 2011. However, Emmett's behavior changed even more after the birth of their son. He began spending more time away from home, sometimes staying out overnight. Ashley became concerned about Emmett's activities and confided in her sister that she feared he might be cheating on her. Meanwhile, Candy, Emmett's assistant, was also experiencing problems in her marriage. Her husband, Robert, was jealous of her working for a young and charismatic man like Emmett, which led to constant fighting and took a toll on their marriage. On March 6, 2011, Ashley and Emmett's 7th wedding anniversary had arrived, but Emmett was absent, claiming he had to attend a bodybuilding convention. Ashley was left alone with the children, feeling anxious about their marriage. She wondered if she was to blame for Emmett's unhappiness. Determined to improve things, she pushed on, as divorce wasn't an option. Ashley chose to address the issue directly. A few days later, on March 11th, she spent the entire day planning the perfect evening to reconnect with Emmett. She prepared his favorite meal, cleaned the house, and made sure the children behaved. At 6 p.m., Ashley had the table set, ready to greet him warmly. However, Emmett didn't arrive until 2 hours later. When Ashley approached him with a kiss, he turned away, further straining their relationship. Despite Emmett's cold demeanor and the growing distance between them, Ashley remained determined to rekindle their love. She believed their relationship was worth fighting for and was willing to do whatever it took to repair it. The family gathered around the table to eat. However, Emmett claimed he wasn't hungry, which was disappointing and hurtful to Ashley. As the rest of the family enjoyed their dinner, Emmett got up, saying he needed to go to Walgreens, but Ashley sensed something was wrong and asked him to stay. Emmett responded harshly and left, leaving Ashley feeling confused and hurt. Meanwhile, Emmett's assistant, Candy, was dealing with her own marital problems. Her husband, Robert, had decided to leave their home after their marriage reached a breaking point. Despite their love for each other, Robert believed it was best to start fresh and move on. That evening, Robert phoned his daughter to check if she was using Candy's car. She told him she isn't. A few minutes later, while driving past Walgreens, she spotted her mother's car in the parking lot. She didn't think much of it and immediately called her father to let him know. Robert responded casually with, "Oh, okay." Unbeknownst to them, this ordinary-sounding conversation would have a profound impact on two families' lives forever. Ashley lay in bed, overcome with worry about her marriage. Despite her frantic texts and calls, Emmett remained unreachable. A nagging feeling in her gut left her uneasy. Around 1 p.m., a 911 call reported gunshots and a screaming woman in a Walgreens parking lot, prompting a swift police response. Upon arrival, the first officer was met with a disturbing scene, a lifeless man on the ground and a wounded person clutching their head in pain. Police sought to speak with Candy Hall, who was present at the scene. She identified the wounded person as her husband, Robert, and the deceased as her boss, Emmett. Emmett had suffered fatal gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Shortly after his body was discovered, Ashley was awakened by a knock on the door from the police. Ashley was stunned and inconsolable, unable to comprehend the events that led to this tragedy. After the police informed Ashley of her husband's death, a detective inquired if she was familiar with Robert and Candy Hall. Ashley stated that she knew Candy as Emmett's assistant but suspected an affair between Candy and Emmett. The police took Candy Hall from the Walgreens parking lot for questioning to piece together the events leading to Emmett's death and Robert's head injury. During the interrogation, detectives asked Candy if she had a romantic relationship with her boss, Emmett. She denied it, also refuting any intimate encounters between them. Candy claimed she went to Walgreens that night to collect a prescription and coincidentally met Emmett. After that, she and Emmett decided to take a drive. While driving to a gas station, Candy received a call from her estranged husband, Robert. She told him she was with Emmett, which led to Robert expressing jealousy and making a threat against Emmett. Candy and Emmett arrived at Walgreens after what felt like an eternity. As they stepped out of the car, Candy saw Robert standing at the entrance. He looked visibly angry. An intense argument broke out between Robert and Emmett, leading to a physical fight. Then, 3 shots were fired, and both men fell to the ground. Candy saw the gun, picked it up, and threw it aside. When questioned by detectives, Candy claimed she didn't know who fired first. After Robert received treatment for his superficial gunshot wound, detectives interviewed him. They told Robert they found a gun at the scene and asked him who it belonged to. Robert admitted the gun was his and explained that it fell from his pocket during the fight with Emmett in the parking lot. Robert alleged that Emmett dove for the gun, triggering a struggle, and Emmett shot him in the head. However, Robert couldn't recall who shot Emmett during the struggle. Given Robert's head wound, detectives weren't surprised by his hazy memory. Nevertheless, they wondered if Emmett was indeed the one who fired first, considering he was the one who ended up dead. To investigate the shooting in the Walgreens parking lot, detectives reviewed the security footage. At 9:55 p.m., Robert Hall arrived in the parking lot. A minute later, he entered the Walgreens store and quickly moved through each aisle, appearing to look for someone. He left the store at 10:06 p.m. and parked his car next to Candy's, waiting there for a few minutes. About 10 minutes later, Emmett's truck entered the parking lot. However, the actual shooting was not captured on camera. Candy, Emmett's assistant, initially denied being in a romantic relationship with Emmett. However, their co-workers suspected otherwise. Co-workers reported seeing Candy and Emmett spending a lot of time together in Emmett's office with the door closed. 3 weeks after Candy was hired, on the day Emmett was shot, detectives discovered that Emmett had accompanied Candy to the public defender's office to discuss her divorce from Robert. During the investigation into Emmett's murder, crime scene investigators searched Emmett's vehicle and found steroids in the glove compartment. This discovery didn't surprise Emmett's loved ones. When Candy gave her statement, she described a shot cadence that led detectives to believe Robert shot Emmett twice before shooting himself in the head. Based on this evidence, detectives obtained an arrest warrant for Robert Hall, charging him with first-degree murder. Robert Hall was arrested and charged with Emmett's murder. The consequences of Robert Hall's actions were severe, with a possible conviction of first-degree murder carrying a sentence of either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. Prosecutors argued that Robert Hall was driven by anger towards Emmett, who had been having an affair with Robert's wife, Candy. They alleged that this anger led Robert to shoot Emmett and then attempt to take his own life. In contrast, Robert's defense team presented a different scenario. They claimed that Emmett, who had a history of steroid abuse, was the aggressor on the night of his death. According to the defense, Emmett managed to get hold of Robert's gun during the altercation and shot Robert first. Robert then regained control of the gun and killed Emmett in self-defense. Candy Hall, Robert's wife, was a key witness in the trial. Her testimony differed slightly from her initial statement to the police. On the witness stand, Candy described hearing a single pop, followed by 2 rapid pops, rather than the initial 2 shots and then a third. This revised testimony supported the defense's argument that Emmett had shot Robert first, and that Robert had then shot Emmett twice, resulting in his death. To prove that Robert was the shooter in the Walgreens parking lot, prosecutors presented forensic evidence about the type of weapon used. This evidence showed that the weapon accumulates a large amount of gunshot residue, GSR, after being fired. After the shooting, investigators tested Robert and Emmett for gunshot residue. The test found 32 gunshot residue particles on Robert's left palm and 23 on his right. In contrast, Emmett had only 1 particle on his left hand and none on his right. These results strongly suggested that Robert fired the gun, not Emmett. After a thorough review, the jury delivered a verdict of not guilty of first-degree murder for Robert Hall. However, they unanimously agreed that he was guilty of second-degree murder, indicating that the murder was not premeditated. As a result, Robert was sentenced to 30 years in prison by the presiding judge. He will be eligible for parole in 2028 at the age of 58. Despite being convicted, Robert has consistently maintained his innocence and appealed the verdict. In 2021, the Idaho Supreme Court reaffirmed his conviction, denying his request for a retrial. Ashley struggled to cope with the fact that her husband, Emmett, was murdered by the husband of his lover, Candy Hall. In a 2015 Dr. Phil interview, Ashley met Candy face-to-face for the first time. Despite the emotional pain, Ashley was determined to move forward. She closed the book on her old life and started anew by moving out of the town where she and Emmett raised their 5 children. As time passed, the children adjusted to the change and started to find happiness again. Ashley eventually remarried and had 2 more children. She currently blogs to support trauma victims. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sierra Lamar. In March 2012, the Lamar family, consisting of Steve, a computer expert, his wife Marlene, and their 2 daughters, Danielle and Sierra, living in Fremont, California. Sierra was younger sister. She was born on October 19, 1996. Both girls had a relatively comfortable upbringing, with the usual ups and downs that come with family life. However, a disturbing fact about their father's past had a profound impact on the family. When Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father, Steve, was involved in a serious incident involving inappropriate behavior with one of their roommates during a sleepover. As a result, Steve was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Despite Steve's past convictions, both Sierra and Danielle reported having a good relationship with him, describing him as a kind and respected father. However, when Marlene learned about the incident, they decided to end their relationship, which was already struggling. Marlene soon moved on and started a new relationship. Despite this, both Sierra and Danielle attended Washington High School in their community, where they enjoyed socializing and performed reasonably well academically. Sierra was a cheerful and lively girl who was well-liked at school. She enjoyed participating in dance competitions and cheerleading. In October 2011, her mother, Marlene, decided to move from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a town located 40 miles southwest. Sierra, her mother, and her mother's boyfriend, Rick Gardner, settled into a rented ranch-style home on a rural cul-de-sac. However, Sierra was initially unhappy about leaving behind her close friends and hobbies in Fremont. She struggled to adjust to her new school, Sobrato High, where she didn't receive the same warm welcome she had at Washington High. Despite this, Sierra eventually settled in and made new friends, earning the respect and even joining the cheerleading squad again. By March 2012, Sierra had adapted well to her new environment. On March 11th, she had a conversation with her father and her sister, who still lived in Fremont, and updated them on her progress. The conversation was mostly positive, with Sierra expressing excitement about an upcoming school project, wanting to get her hair colored, and discussing her homework with her sister. Her academic performance seemed to be going well. Sierra ended her Thursday evening chat with Danielle and Steve after dinner, as she had school the next day and it was getting late. They agreed to part ways and promised to catch up soon, unaware that this would be their last conversation. The next morning, February 16, 2012, Sierra got ready for school, locking the house behind her. At 6:29 a.m., she tweeted a friend, then put on her shoes and left to catch the bus. The bus stop was located on a desolate road between Palm and Dewey Avenues, far from Sierra's school, Sobrato High. Many students, including Sierra, had to cross this road daily to catch the bus. At 7:11 a.m., Sierra texted a friend to meet up before class. However, when the bus arrived at 7:11 and 15 seconds a.m., Sierra was missing. Sierra didn't show up to school, which her friends found unusual. However, they didn't think it was serious enough to report to the school authorities. The day went on as usual. When the school day ended, Marlene, Sierra's mom, tried to contact Sierra, but her call went straight to voicemail. Although Marlene thought this was strange, she didn't get worried. However, when she got home and saw that Sierra's room was still empty, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to ask if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, the answer was no. When Marlene called Danielle and a few other friends, they all left with the same message that Sierra could not be found. Marlene began to panic when she called Sierra's high school and discovered that she had missed all her classes. After her calling the authorities, officers were immediately sent to the pedo-Hispanic court. They began by speaking with those closest to Sierra, including several of her friends, who were all candid about the difficulties Sierra and her family were facing. Although Sierra was generally content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce forced her to leave her family and old friends behind. Authorities initially thought that Sierra might have left voluntarily, as she had previously mentioned returning to Fremont in a light-hearted and sometimes serious manner. However, there were several things that contradicted this theory. Sierra had stopped posting on social media, her phone was turned off, and all calls went straight to voicemail. She also never arrived at the front door of her home. Her loved ones launched a massive search despite police downplaying her disappearance. The investigation into Sierra's disappearance led to a complex trail of evidence. 2 days after she vanished, data forensics began examining her phone's previous activity. They discovered that her phone had briefly turned on in the middle of the night, before turning off again. The phone's coordinates pointed to a field near Sierra's house, which became a crucial lead in the investigation. A search crew thoroughly searched the fields where Sierra's phone had last been detected. Within minutes, they found the Samsung Galaxy phone she had been using. It was near the road, damaged, and had likely been thrown from a vehicle. Investigators concluded that Sierra hadn't turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they believed that rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. This coincidence was crucial, as the entire investigation hinged on the discovery of her phone. The case took a disturbing turn when detectives realized that Sierra's phone was probably thrown from a moving vehicle. There were no footprints, tire tracks, or other visible evidence. The next day, a search crew made another discovery. Sierra's backpack was found 2 kilometers from her house, discarded outside a barn. The bag contained her schoolwork, inhaler, and money, suggesting that she had been on her way to school and was forcibly separated from her essential items. Additionally, a complete outfit, believed to be the one Sierra was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This outfit included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. The outfit was subjected to DNA testing, which yielded results. Specifically, her pants contained male foreign DNA, suggesting that she had likely been assaulted. The discovery of Sierra's phone and clothing led to a surge of local and international sympathy. The search effort, which had already intensified significantly in the days following her disappearance, received a fresh wave of support. Authorities received over 1,000 new tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Multiple search teams, comprising over 800 individuals, were deployed to thoroughly search the area. They systematically examined every available lake and reservoir, combed over fields, and searched abandoned buildings. Sierra's disappearance was a major topic of discussion in the community, with missing person posters put up everywhere. Her parents offered a $10,000 reward for any credible information leading to her safe return. Despite the efforts of the community and investigators, only a golf ball and a flipper were found. However, unbeknownst to the public, investigators were making progress in identifying a potential suspect. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, on March 28, DNA analysis revealed that the DNA on her pants belonged to a local man. As part of the investigation, DNA samples from all 57 registered sex offenders in the Morgan Hill zip code were compared to the DNA evidence. Sierra's father, who had a criminal record, proactively contacted law enforcement and was quickly eliminated as a suspect. One of the local men who had not been ruled out as a suspect was Antolin Garcia Torres. Following a DNA match between the 21-year-old man and Sierra's pants, he came to public attention. At the time, he lived in Maple Leaf Recreational Vehicle Park with his mother, pregnant wife, and daughter, about 7 miles from Sierra's house. Antolin Garcia Torres had a troubling past, had a challenging upbringing marked by abuse and neglect. His father, who was abusive and often drunk, had threatened to kill him and his mother before being imprisoned for molesting a young family member. The father's abusive behavior appears to have been passed on to his son. Although 2009 allegations of having sex with a minor were dismissed, Antolin Garcia Torres's DNA was collected. He was also detained in 2010 for impeding police operations. Due to the suspicious relationship between he and Sierra, detectives put him under constant surveillance. As it was unclear whether Sierra was still alive, Antolin Garcia Torres was the most likely person to have information. To monitor his activities, police tapped his phone, placed a GPS tracker in his car, and had 2 undercover investigators move into a vehicle park next to his house. After discovering that the vehicle park had cameras at the front door, investigators began reviewing security footage from the neighborhood around Antolin Garcia Torres's residence. They examined the film taken on the day of Sierra's disappearance to determine whether Antolin had left or arrived home. It was discovered that Antolin had left the campground in his red Volkswagen Jetta at 7 a.m. on the morning she vanished. Given that his home was only 7 miles from Sierra, Antolin's travel time matched the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped. Although Antolin had left for work at the usual time, Safeway's shift records showed that he did not arrive at work on Sierra went missing. It was found that 3 years prior, there were 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts in the Safeway parking lot. But none of the perpetrators were identified or detained. The only evidence from these attempts was a taser dropped by the perpetrator, which had a fingerprint on one of its batteries. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, requiring a direct one-to-one comparison to match. The idea seemed promising, but when Antolin's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a surprising revelation emerged. In reality, their suspect was indeed Antolin. Antolin was taken into custody by investigators after being positively identified as someone who was present when Sierra went missing. His DNA was found on her pants, and he had a history of involvement in kidnappings. This evidence was enough to detain him for questioning and to seize his vehicle for further DNA testing. During the interview, the suspect, Antolin, showed arrogance and was dismissive of the questions. He claimed that on the day Sierra vanished, he had gone fishing and didn't know who she was. He was confident that the investigators wouldn't find any evidence against him. However, before the interview ended, Antolin made a strange revelation. He admitted to having a habit of strangling a snake while driving and then throwing the tissue out the window. He also claimed to have thrown out a used tissue in the exact spot where Sierra's bag was found on the morning she went missing. We already had a 1 in a million chance with the rain on Sierra's phone, and the police didn't believe Antolin's implausible explanation either. On May 21, 2012, Antolin Garcia Torres was formally detained in connection with Sierra Lamar's disappearance outside his workplace in a Safeway parking lot. This was the result of several distinct links between Sierra and Antolin's vehicle. A DNA test found her DNA on the interior door handle of the car's rear door. Additionally, fibers from the car seats matched those found on Sierra's clothing, and a piece of rope inside the car contained a strand of her hair. This proved beyond a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. However, even after his arrest, there was a significant issue. Despite the apparent evidence, Sierra's body had yet to be found. Could they accuse Antolin of first-degree murder without a body or verified death? In reality, Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced on May 19, 2014, that he would seek the death penalty against Antolin. Although Antolin had previously pleaded not guilty to killing Sierra, the overwhelming evidence pointed to his guilt. Antolin's trial began on January 30, 2017, after being delayed. The trial was prolonged and stressful for all parties involved, with the prosecution and defense presenting lengthy arguments over 13 weeks of testimony. Antolin's defense team argued that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields during his childhood may have impaired his cognitive abilities. They claimed that this exposure was not his fault and, as a result, he should not be eligible for the death penalty. The defense argued that Antolin faced a unique disadvantage due to circumstances beyond his control. In a final attempt, Antolin's defense team requested a new trial, questioning the chief investigator's reliability and honesty, and alleging that he had tampered with evidence in the past. However, this attempt was denied. The jury convicted Antolin Garcia Torres of Sierra Lamar's first-degree murder on May 9, 2017. The evidence was so overwhelming against Antolin that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Sierra's body has never been located. Outside of the evidence offered, Antolin was formally given a life sentence without the chance of parole after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Antolin has stayed largely silent, and despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, only one letter has been answered. Antolin wrote, "I hold fast to my innocence, and I'm not going to talk about the matter." It's puzzling why Antolin continues to claim innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The presence of his DNA on Sierra's belongings, her DNA in his car, his past crimes, and a detailed timeline all clearly indicate his involvement in Sierra's disappearance. The search for Sierra Lamar is believed by some organizers to be the longest continuous search for a missing person in U.S. history. It spanned 3 years, with over 1,100 searches conducted within a 15-mile radius, totaling 50,000 man-hours of effort. Volunteers braved extreme weather conditions, from scorching summers to cold winters, in their quest for any information about Sierra. Despite the passing of time, many volunteers continue to search for her, driven by the desire to bring closure to her family, even though they acknowledge the likelihood of her being deceased. Currently, the whereabouts of Sierra's body remain unknown, but the hope is that one day, the Lamar family will find the closure they seek. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristen Smart. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20th, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. She was raised by her parents, Stan and Denise Smart. When she was young, the family moved to Stockton, California. She is the oldest of 3 children. Kristen's mother, Denise, often called her a dreamer. Kristen loved the ocean and had an adventurous spirit. She was truly passionate about experiencing life. Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before college, she worked as a lifeguard and a summer camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She was ambitious but indecisive. Kristen initially enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture because she loved to draw, but later changed her major to communication studies. Denise said that Kristen wanted to travel the world as a reporter. On Memorial Day weekend in 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail, "Good news, good news. I'll call home Sunday." Kristen was in regular contact with her family every Sunday. That day, Kristen had attended an off-campus birthday party that Friday night. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled taking her there. Margarita said Kristen seemed a little upset that Margarita couldn't join her that night. Margarita's last words to Kristen were to be careful. Kristen was wearing a gray cropped t-shirt, black shorts, and red Puma sneakers. As the party was winding down, at 2 a.m., classmate Tim Davis found Kristen unconscious on the grass nearby. He and another classmate and acquaintance of Kristen's, Cheryl Anderson, helped her walk back to the school dormitory. Paul Florist then approached Kristen and offered to help her get back to her dorm, saying he was leaving the party. Paul, Kristen, and Cheryl returned to campus, and since Davis lived off campus, he could not accompany them. Once the 3 of them were alone, Cheryl began to notice Paul's strange behavior. She noticed the many unexpected stops along the way and the way he interacted with Kristen. While walking, Paul would frequently hold Kristen around the waist, and Kristen would also wrap her arms around his neck. This made Cheryl even more curious, especially when Paul suggested that Cheryl walk ahead while he and Kristen tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before reminding Paul to make sure Kristen returned safely. Paul claimed that he had dropped Kristen off at the intersection of the hallways leading to both of their dorms. It was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart was never seen again. When Sunday passed without a call from Kristen, Kristen's roommates and neighbors thought something was wrong. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing, but no report was filed. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. 5 days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by UPD investigators. Paul said that the two had gone their separate ways at the intersection. However, investigators quickly noticed Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul explained that he had injured it during a basketball game. But a friend later disputed this story, stating that Paul's black eye had appeared before the basketball game. Paul told the friend that he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later, Paul was interviewed again and confessed that he had lied about the black eye incident. This time, Paul said that he had hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. However, when questioned further, Paul admitted that this story didn't make sense either. He said he was in the truck at about 2 a.m. on May 27, 1996, and was installing a car radio because he was selling the truck. A search for Kristen began. Search dogs were used on June 29, 1996. 4 dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search for clues at the dormitory. Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog was sent to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest in the room, except for the corner of a mattress. Dog handler Carta Adela Morris said the dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. During the search, their reactions suggested a high probability that there was a body in room 128. Another handler also recalled her dog's behavior while searching room 128. The dog searched the left side of the room several times, and Tori's behavior and strong reactions suggested that she had picked up the scent of something, but was still searching for its source. Although Paul Flores remained the prime suspect, no formal charges were ever filed. During that time, Paul Flores continued to live his life freely, although he was suspected by the police. From 1996 to 2007, the investigation continued, and searches were conducted at every possible location, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. However, none of these searches yielded positive results. On the advice of his attorney, Paul Flores decided not to answer any questions by exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A person who invokes this provision has the right to remain silent and is not required to provide information that could incriminate them. During his 1997 deposition, Paul exercised this right and remained silent. This made it difficult for investigators, especially attorney James R. Murphy, as they were unable to find any new leads. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking Paul to the case, former Sheriff Ed Williams also admitted that he did not see a way to close the case. Paul's silence frustrated the authorities. The Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit for Kristen. However, the court decided not to proceed with charges. Kristen's case remains under criminal investigation. Paul and his family have refused to publicly address Kristen's case or the allegations against them. A roommate of Paul's, Derek C., said Paul joked about Kristen's disappearance. However, these allegations remain speculative as Paul has hired a lawyer to defend himself from further questioning. 6 years after her disappearance, Denise Smart said it was a difficult time. A longtime case follower, Chris Lambert, who was 8 at the time, was haunted by Kristen's disappearance. As he grew older, he wondered why the case of Kristen were still no answers. In 2018, Chris quit his job to create a podcast about the case full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by his passion for finding answers. In 2019, Chris visited Kristen's memorial on her birthday and decided to wait to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. Chris met Kristen's mother and began talking to her about her daughter. From there, Chris and the Smart family built a strong relationship and worked to bring Kristen's story to the public through the podcast, In Your Own Backyard. The podcast began as a local series but quickly went national and garnered over 11 million downloads. The core of the podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from campus. Chris has a unique ability to get people to feel comfortable sharing information with him. He has interviewed many people who have been involved in the case to varying degrees. Chris is especially interested in witnesses who are reluctant to speak or have been ignored by investigators. He has uncovered many allegations that have been speculation for years. An interview with an Australian exchange student brought to light a possible fight between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student allegedly saw Kristen fighting with Paul on the night of her disappearance. During the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance, several theories emerged. The first theory was that Paul Flores was injured in a fight with Kristen. The second theory was that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. The third theory was that Kristen's body was buried in the Flores backyard. The investigation also revealed allegations of serious misconduct by Paul toward multiple women. Women who had attended school or worked with Paul reported his excessive flirting and excessive drinking. Several women accused Paul of sexual or physical assault, including harassment and controlling behavior. Chris attempted to contact Paul for an interview, but was unsuccessful. An interview could have cleared up some of the loose ends and given Paul a chance to address the allegations against him. However, Chris has not contacted Kristen's family. San Luis Obispo Police Chief Parkinson praised Chris for his work in helping to advance the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance. Chris created a compelling, well-done podcast that drew people to the case. Parkinson noted that going public with the story convinced several people involved to come forward, which had a significant impact on the investigation. Denise Smart also thanked Chris for his hard work, saying that the podcast had created an opportunity for people to come together to seek the truth. She also thanked Sheriff Parkinson for helping to keep the case fresh since he took office in 2011. Although the Flores family has remained silent, the investigation and podcast have shaken their confidence. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores were presented as evidence. Then, on February 5 of that year, authorities executed search warrants at 4 different locations, including a home in Los Angeles. During the search, Paul Flores was briefly detained. On April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was executed at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, California. The search resulted in the recovery of several items of evidence, including date rape drugs and videos showing Paul Flores sexually assaulting young women. Paul Flores was subsequently arrested on February 11, 2021, in Palos Verdes, Rancho, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of that year, a search warrant was issued at the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, and police used dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search the property, and an older Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after the dogs conducted the search. On April 13, Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in connection with Kristen's case. Paul and Ruben were charged in the case involving Kristen. Paul was charged with murder, and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Due to the statute of limitations, Paul was able to escape the sexual assault charge but still faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly killing during attempted rape. In September 2021, a judge declared the case sufficient to go to trial in April 2022. However, the trial was postponed and moved to Monterey County. On July 18, 2022, Paul and Ruben's trials began simultaneously but with 2 separate jury groups. In his opening statement, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Pavril described Kristen as a young person who had been cruelly treated and taken too soon. He said Kristen's family was suffering from the unknown whereabouts of their daughter and blamed Paul Flores for this. The deputy prosecutor also presented evidence found at Ruben's home that showed both Paul and Ruben were responsible for Kristen's death and the disposal of her body. However, Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, questioned the veracity of this evidence. He said it was a tragic situation that Kristen's body was never found and there was no DNA evidence. He stated that people believed she was dead, but there was no concrete evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at the dorm. Since July, Paul Flores' trial has attracted public attention as multiple allegations of harassment and violence have been made. Several women have come forward to accuse Paul Flores of inappropriate behavior, including 2 women who call themselves Rondado and Saradu. Both women alleged that they met Paul Flores and then felt unusually lethargic, leading to memory loss. When they woke up, they said Paul Flores had abused them. Their detailed and emotional testimony brought jurors to tears, forcing Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call a recess. In addition, testimony regarding the search of Ruben Flores' home also moved another juror to tears. Investigators and experts also attended the trial, providing more details about the case. Judge O'Keefe said the trial would be long and difficult, and jurors would likely be emotional at times. One of the key pieces of evidence presented at the trial was Jennifer Hudson's testimony. She said she met Paul Flores when she was 17 and that he told her that he had buried Kristen Smart under the slope in his backyard in Hawasna. This was one of the most important pieces of evidence presented at the trial. Paul's defense attorney questioned Jennifer's testimony and highlighted her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, calling into question her credibility. The attorney suggested that she was being dishonest in her answers to the question. In fact, Jennifer admitted in a social media post that she did not report the incident to police until after a podcast aired. She also canceled an interview with a detective after meeting with the podcast producer in 2019. The attorney went on to ask Jennifer if she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She suggested that this was the most plausible explanation. When the attorney pursued the subject of Jennifer's association with biker gang members, the prosecutor objected to the question and the judge sided with them. During cross-examination, Pervrel asked Jennifer to explain her previous testimony and that Jennifer felt responsible for the Smart family's suffering. She explained that if she had not been afraid, she would have spoken up sooner. Jennifer then broke down in tears. No reason was given, and the trial was adjourned after Jennifer's testimony. The trial of Kristen Smart is scheduled to continue until October 2022. For the Smart family, the emotional, decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end. However, the grief over the loss of their daughter will never end. On October 18, 2022, separate juries hearing the case simultaneously in Monterey County Circuit Court found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder and his father, Ruben Flores, not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ruben Flores faces a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on March 10, 2023. Paul Flores is currently serving his sentence at Pleasant Valley State Prison. On August 23, 2023, Flores was attacked by fellow inmate Jason Boudreau, who was serving a life sentence for killing his girlfriend. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Megan Landowski. Megan Landowski lived with her family in Portsmouth, Virginia, a bustling seaport town. Her family included her father, Chris Short, a Navy officer, her mother, Angela, and 2 other siblings. Chris Short had been transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth after a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Chris's family felt relieved when they moved there. Megan Landowski, 16 years old, was the oldest in the family. When her family moved, she quickly signed up for dance classes. Megan had a deep passion for dance and showed outstanding talent from the beginning. She started with ballet and then expanded into many different genres. Megan's mother described her as a beautiful, friendly, and talented girl. Megan adapted quickly to her new learning environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. She had an attractive personality and easily made friends with her classmates. Although she attended a prestigious high school that specialized in dance, Megan wanted to attend a regular high school so she could hang out with friends in her neighborhood. She was described as vivacious and kind, with a natural tendency to connect with people. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early to go to school. She chatted with her mother about the upcoming test before going to class. After saying goodbye to Angela, Megan went to school. Angela had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early, and she went home. Angela had told Megan that she expected Megan's call when she got home. Upon arriving, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring Angela that she had returned safely, and ending by telling Angela she loved her. Then she continued to prepare lunch for herself. However, things took a terrifying and disturbing turn around 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, Chris, returned home and found the door open. Although he didn't worry at first, he knew Megan had been warned about leaving the door open, so he trusted that she wouldn't leave it unattended like that. He called her name, but there was only silence. When he entered the kitchen, he was faced with a horrifying sight: Megan lying motionless on the floor. Chris quickly called the police and reported the incident. Local detective Doug Funkhauser suddenly received an alarming call reporting the murder of a young girl in town. Immediately, he rushed to the location of the crime, Roberts Court in Portsmouth. When he approached the scene of the crime, he saw horrifying signs. The bloodstains on the door handle were very clear. When he entered the kitchen, he discovered a gruesome scene. The body of a young girl lay on the floor, her body seriously injured. Megan had suffered multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed with tape. For Detective Doug, this case was one of the most brutal cases he had ever investigated. An initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf found inside the home matched a bush outside a first-floor window, suggesting that the killer may have entered through that window. In the upstairs bedroom, signs of a struggle were evident on the bed. Megan's underwear was on the floor, and a box of duct tape was found under the left corner of the bed, appearing to match the tape used to bind Megan's hands and face. Forensic experts found blood on the tape and other items, which were collected for further analysis, including pillows, sheets, and blankets. Additional forensic testing indicated that the bedroom was the scene of the sexual assault, as traces of the killer's semen were found on Megan's comforter and underwear. These findings suggested that Megan had been assaulted in the bedroom before the attack downstairs. Megan was found with a large number of injuries, 43 stab wounds, including 11 post-mortem. The forensic team also reported that Megan was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with duct tape. The murder weapon was determined to be a missing kitchen knife. Investigators later found the knife in the sink and determined that the initial attack had occurred in the bedroom, but Megan had somehow escaped down the stairs. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator left footprints during the crime and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. A second knife used in the crime was discovered in a nearby drain. Detectives quickly searched the neighborhood for witnesses, but no one provided any useful information. The killer appeared to have escaped undetected during the day. After the shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly alerted the police to their suspicions regarding the identity of the killer. They suspected an old acquaintance with a troubled past and believed he may be involved in the case. This person is Robert Hickey, a former colleague of Chris's in the Navy who had sexually assaulted Megan when she was 16. Chris and Robert had worked together as technicians and had become close friends, often inviting Robert and his family to their home. Megan's behavior changed dramatically after the abuse. She became withdrawn, and her grades began to decline. Chris noticed the change and asked her what was wrong, but she was initially reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, Megan confided in Chris, revealing that Robert had been sexually assaulting her in secret. Chris was furious and immediately cut off ties with the Hickeys. He also reported the abuse to the authorities. Around the same time, Megan's parents filed a lawsuit against Robert, just 5 months before she was murdered. The trial is pending, and Megan is expected to testify against him. Robert has a lot at stake, including his reputation and his freedom. Megan expressed concern that Robert might try to harm her to prevent her from testifying, and unfortunately, it appears that her fears have come true. When police searched Robert's home, they did not find any direct evidence linking him to Megan's murder. However, upon closer inspection of his computer, they discovered that he had attempted to erase the hard drive. Investigators were able to recover a recently deleted file containing sexually explicit images of minors. This discovery led to Robert being charged with possession of child pornography and becoming the prime suspect in Megan's murder. He was brought in for questioning, and authorities hope that he will confess to the crime. Robert was visibly nervous throughout the interview, but he insisted that he was at the Navy base on the day of Megan's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not left the base. However, after verifying his alibi with his colleagues, the police discovered a gap in his timeline, raising the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder. The police obtained surveillance footage from the base but found no evidence that Robert had left. Despite this, he remained a suspect. To investigate further, a DNA sample was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results showed no match, ruling out Robert as the killer. This discovery left the police without any leads or suspects, leaving them frustrated. They then turned their attention to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After taking a DNA sample from Chris, he was quickly cleared. Megan's family members, including her younger brother, Corey, were also ruled out as suspects. The autopsy revealed that the murder was extremely brutal, indicating that the perpetrator had used extreme violence against Megan. Given Megan's popularity and gentle nature, it was difficult to narrow the investigation based on hostile relationships. This made the identity of the killer even more mysterious. The investigation into Megan's case did not produce any suspects. Detectives focused on Megan's life at school and interviewed each of her friends. Megan's best friend was interviewed but did not provide any useful information. Police then spoke to other friends and acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School and learned that Megan had dated a few people but nothing too serious. Although these men did not appear to be suspects, police asked them to provide DNA samples as a precaution. Meanwhile, experts retested DNA from the crime scene, which suggested that the killer was likely an African American male. For 6 months, no major developments were made, but that changed when a helpful classmate provided valuable information, a list of boys with whom Megan had occasionally flirted. Police looked through the list and found that they had spoken to all of the boys on the list, except for one, a 17-year-old named Robert Lee Barnes. Megan and Robert Barnes were both in the performing arts program at Churchill High School. Megan confided in her friend that she believed Robert might have a crush on her. At school, Robert was considered an excellent violinist, and as a student, he had always earned good grades, exhibited exemplary behavior, and had no disciplinary problems. As one of Megan's friends, Robert visited Megan's home several times, showing respectful behavior during these visits, and Megan's parents were very fond of him. When the police questioned Robert about Megan, he described her as a kind and pleasant person and was shocked that someone would want to harm her. He mentioned that he and Megan had attended shows together and occasionally hung out. However, towards the end of the interview, Robert's demeanor changed when he was asked to provide a DNA sample. Unlike Megan's other classmates, who were cooperative with the request, Robert hesitated and then refused, which aroused the suspicion of the investigators. Robert said that his mother did not allow the DNA test, but the police informed him that his parents' permission was not required because he was almost 18 years old. However, Robert still refused. This refusal made the investigators feel uncomfortable and suspicious that something was wrong with Robert. Therefore, after the interview ended, the investigators suggested that he talk to his mother and try again. The day after the initial investigation, Robert contacted the authorities to request a meeting. When asked if he had obtained his mother's permission, he replied that he had not, but he had given them a piece of his chewing gum as a DNA sample. Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a rubber glove, and gave it to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators remained suspicious of Robert. The DNA lab then contacted the detective to inquire about the sample source. After confirming that Robert had indeed placed the gum in the glove, the lab questioned whether he had been continuously monitored while providing the gum. This investigation was prompted by the surprising fact that the DNA on the gum matched that of a woman. It turned out that Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with another piece before handing it to the investigators. On October 23, 2008, Robert was called in for questioning again, this time with his mother. When confronted with the DNA findings, Robert was asked about the chewing gum. He made a critical mistake by stating, "This happened on Thursday." Up until that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When the officers pointed this out to Robert, he provided an implausible explanation. According to Robert, on that Thursday, Megan had asked him to visit her home. Upon his arrival, Robert claimed to have found Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. The alleged attacker held the gun to Robert, forcing him to tie Megan up. Robert then fabricated a story that he had been compelled to sexually assault Megan. He further claimed that they all went downstairs, where the attacker stabbed Megan after obtaining a knife. Ultimately, Robert stated that the attacker had forced him to inflict an injury on himself to ensure his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert fabricated a false story to portray himself as the victim and to explain away any incriminating evidence. However, the police did not believe his account. When presented with evidence of footprints found at the scene, the investigator asked Robert why only his footprints were found and not those of the person he claimed had attacked him. Robert's mother intervened, telling Robert to stop talking and asserting that Robert was a good and innocent person. The police then took a DNA sample from Robert. The DNA analysis showed a match between Robert's DNA and the DNA found at the crime scene. As a result, Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. According to police, Robert likely broke into the house through a window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom. He then attacked her, and when she tried to escape downstairs, he chased her, stabbing her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she was dead. After the crime, Robert left the scene and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Robert became unhealthily obsessed with Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Robert's romantic advances were rejected, he turned to coercion, which led to a tragic end. In September 2009, Robert accepted a plea deal that allowed him to be tried as a juvenile, despite having just turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. As a result, Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of the motive behind Robert's actions, whether it was love, lust, bitterness, or the pain of rejection, none of these reasons justify his horrific crimes against the person he claimed to love and care for. Robert chose the path of destruction, taking the life of an innocent person and ruining his own life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett is an 8-year-old girl who has just completed elementary school. She lives with her single mother, Elaine, who has worked hard to provide her daughter with a comfortable life. Elaine always tries to give Jennifer a happy childhood, full of love and care. Thanks to that, Jennifer has become a cheerful, active girl who loves to explore and learn. However, Jennifer still has a common fear in children, which is the fear of the dark. Therefore, she often sleeps in the same room as her mother. Elaine understands this fear and is always by her daughter's side. On the night of August 9, 2009, mother and daughter slept in the same room again. But Jennifer did not sleep well, constantly turning and lightly kicking her mother, making it difficult for Elaine to sleep. Elaine woke up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested Jennifer sleep in her own room so she could rest before the new workday. But Jennifer replied convincingly, "Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight because I love you," and she went to her own room to sleep for the rest of the night. Elaine regretted the decision for a long time, but at the time, she couldn't have known what would happen next. The next morning, Elaine went to wake Jennifer but found her missing. She found the window facing the parking lot wide open. Elaine quickly called 911. When the police arrived, she said she hadn't heard any noise or screaming after Jennifer went back to her room to sleep alone. Their apartment was on the first floor, and the window in Jennifer's room looked out onto the parking lot, causing Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment wasn't the ideal place for her and her little girl to live, but it was the best they could afford at the time. However, Elaine's parents decided to help her and her daughter find a new place to live. They bought a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother planned to move there in a few months, and they were there the day before Jennifer went missing. After her daughter went missing, Elaine was extremely sad and remorseful. She said that Jennifer was all she had and prayed that she could return. The police worked tirelessly to find Jennifer. Fortunately, Elaine did not have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in the fields and accidentally discovered a little girl. When they arrived at the scene, the police found 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of a field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was serious, with a cut on her throat from ear to ear, causing her to lose a lot of blood and turn pale. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors tried to save her life. Due to the injury to her neck, Jennifer was unable to speak. After surgery, Jennifer's condition stabilized, the bleeding stopped, and her breathing was steady. However, when Jennifer woke up from surgery, her mental state changed dramatically. She began to fear all men, including male doctors, making it difficult for her to recover. During this time, Jennifer was constantly panicking and even reacted defensively when male doctors tried to approach her. Elaine tried to explain to her daughter that everyone around her wanted to help and care for her. However, Jennifer did not trust anyone. Her behavior was understandable when she finally revealed what happened to her that night. The challenge was to gently get the information out of her. Now, considering she was only 8 years old, this was really difficult. Jennifer was too scared to speak directly to the investigators, so the detectives gave her a notebook and pen to write down her answers to their questions. Because she was afraid of men, Jennifer wrote a letter to her mother, who then forwarded it to the police. Although she was only 8 years old, Jennifer's written responses were surprisingly detailed and accurate. Jennifer explained that she went into her room, turned on the lights, and began reading a book to help her fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep but was then awakened by a stranger who carried her out of the house. The stranger ran down the sidewalk with Jennifer in his arms. As soon as Jennifer realized what was happening, she tried to scream, but the stranger covered her nose and mouth. The stranger then put Jennifer in his car and identified himself as an undercover police officer. However, Jennifer's instincts told her that something was wrong. She looked around and saw her mother's car in the parking lot, which made her even more confused about where they were going and why. Jennifer had been taught that the police were trustworthy, but she had also been warned not to trust strangers. Her fear and recent experiences with strangers made her suspicious of the stranger's words, and she sensed that something was wrong. Jennifer asked the stranger to drop her off at her grandparents' house. But he refused, saying that they were not home. However, she noticed that her grandparents' car was in the driveway, which suggested that he was lying. The man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her house. He told her to watch the moon closely and said that her mother would come when the moon changed color. Jennifer waited anxiously for her mother to pick her up, but her mother never showed up. She suspected that the man was preparing for his true intentions. After 5 minutes, the stranger announced that her mother would not be coming and that they needed to drive further. They stopped at a dead-end street, where Jennifer asked the stranger to prove that he was a real police officer. She questioned him, asking where his gun and badge were. When he said that his gun was in the back seat, Jennifer turned around to look for it. That was when the stranger removed her underwear. Jennifer then lost consciousness, so she was not sure how long she was under his control. Jennifer slowly regained consciousness as she was dragged through a field. her ankles constantly rubbing against the road. The pain from the branches and rocks stabbed into her back, but she pretended to be dead and kept quiet, realizing that this was her chance to survive. Her attacker eventually let go of her legs and left her in the field. Jennifer heard him walk away, followed by the sound of his car door slamming and the sound of the engine driving away. When she regained consciousness, Jennifer found that she could not scream, and she was not sure why. She mustered enough strength to bring her right hand to her neck, where she discovered an open wound. Her hand was covered in blood. The exact time she had been missing is unknown, but it is believed that she had been lying in the field for between 12 and 14 hours. As the sun began to set, Jennifer saw the lights of passing cars nearby and heard the sounds of children. A dog approached her several times, seemingly trying to get its owner's attention, but no one came. Throughout her suffering, Jennifer was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Each time she woke up, she could not believe that she was not dead. Jennifer had accepted her fate, thinking that she would not survive. But everything changed when she heard the sounds of children nearby. Suddenly, something hit her leg. When Jennifer later regained consciousness, she found herself being reassured by a police officer who repeatedly told her, "You've been found, you'll be okay. Just stay with me." The officer's words provided comfort to Jennifer as she was loaded into the Lifelight helicopter. The aftermath was a challenging experience for 8-year-old Jennifer, who struggled to communicate due to her inability to speak. She had to write her answers down on paper to convey her story. Additionally, her fear of men made the situation even more complicated. To make her feel more comfortable, her mother stepped in to ask questions on behalf of the police, relaying Jennifer's answers to the officers waiting behind the door. What's remarkable about Jennifer's story is that, despite her ordeal, she was able to remember the stranger's name. She remembered the man telling her his name was Dennis and describing him as fat, with a possible scar on his face. Police also sought the assistance of forensic pathologist Lois Gibson. Although they could only communicate with Jennifer through gestures and notes, they were able to create an extremely detailed composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch was released in the hope of getting information from the public about the identity of the man in the drawing. Meanwhile, police continued to investigate the scene and found Jennifer's clothes about half a mile away, along with a man's clothes. Despite hopes of finding DNA on the clothes to catch the culprit, no matches were found. Jennifer gradually recovered from her injuries. Despite her young age, she showed incredible resilience. During her recovery, there was a moment when she was upset about a chocolate bar that she couldn't eat. She screamed in frustration and let out a weak sound. The doctors were amazed to see that her vocal cords, which had been nearly severed and were not expected to heal, began to miraculously recover. After a while, Jennifer was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. She returned home and went back to school, eventually finishing high school and college. After that, Jennifer decided to become a children's librarian. Even so, she never forgot what happened that night. Every day, she felt like she was chasing a criminal, and that the criminal could be anyone. Jennifer thought that it could be her new neighbor, or a stranger at the post office or the grocery store. She always felt like the person was watching her and would come back to kill her. Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan. For the first time in years, she was able to trust a man. They fell in love and Jennifer felt a little more secure. However, around that time, the clues to her attacker began to fade. The chances of finding him were slim. Her case was passed from investigator to investigator. But still no progress was made. 18 years after that terrible night, Jennifer received a phone call. It was a notice that Detective Tim Cromie was taking over her case and wanted to meet with her. Tim Cromie pledged to do everything he could to catch the criminal. Jennifer trusted him, and Tim Cromie told her that he would do everything in his power until the end of his career to get the answers she needed about this case. To help with the case, Tim decided to involve FBI agent Richard Renison in the investigation. Richard had worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered a large amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and shortly after she was found. Jennifer's underwear, shirt, and other items belonging to the perpetrator were particularly important, so they sent a sample of the DNA found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although the detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in the 19 years since the crime, they understood that the age of the case could cause the evidence to not be prioritized in the lab. Despite the years, their work finally paid off. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford, the man Jennifer had described years earlier. The 8-year-old Jennifer had described the man with astonishing accuracy, even though she was on pain medication at the time and unable to speak. Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas. His DNA was entered into the national database after an attack on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. Dennis was released on parole on February 4, 2000. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for drunk driving less than half a mile from his home. He later remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Investigators Tim Cromie and Richard Renison found a lot of information about Dennis. In 1987, Dennis had been arrested in Dickinson, 3 years before the attack on Jennifer. The investigators discovered that he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer's residence, and Jennifer was able to confirm his identity as the kidnapper. They then requested a photo of Dennis's driver's license from when he was 19. Upon seeing the photo, they were shocked because the man looked very similar to the sketch created based on Jennifer's description at age 8. On October 19, 2009, Dennis Cyril Bradford was arrested. However, he claimed that he did not remember why he stopped near Jennifer's residence or why he had mistreated her. Dennis also revealed a detail that investigators did not know. After the attack, he felt so overwhelmed by guilt that he attempted suicide with a handgun. Despite reaching for the gun, Dennis was ultimately unable to pull the trigger and decided to seek psychiatric help. During his stay at the psychiatric hospital, Dennis accidentally visited the hospital where Jennifer was still a patient, and he was very close to her at the time. Immediately after the interview, the detectives informed Jennifer of Dennis Bradford's arrest. She expressed gratitude to the detectives, especially Detective Tim Cromie and Agent Richard Renison, for their efforts and their promise not to drop the case. She also admitted that she looked forward to facing Dennis Bradford in court because he was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial. Jennifer was given the opportunity to choose a court date, and she chose August 10, the 20th anniversary of the attack. A turning point in the case came on May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, when Dennis hanged himself in his cell. Jennifer faced another challenge in her life due to the trauma Dennis caused. She almost lost the ability to conceive. Fortunately, Dr. Craig Witz, after hearing Jennifer's story, generously offered her his services for free twice in late 2012. As a happy ending, Jennifer and her husband eventually welcomed their daughter Jenna and then their son Jonah.